Good morning, everyone. I am Cătălin Lungu, the REHVA president, and I will open this morning session of the Brussels summit of our federation. I will start saying that this is a special day. After another special day we celebrated a few days ago. You probably, all of you know that on 8th of November, we had a special event, the World Ventilation Day. A very new event supported by more than 20 notorious bodies of researchers and professional practitioners, all passionate about ventilation, about clean air inside buildings, wanting to raise awareness about the importance of the ventilation in buildings. I said today it's a special day because we will reach today exactly 8 billion people on Earth, and all them need proper food, need clean energy, need clean air. They need also shelters. Taking into account the COVID-19 pandemic, taking into account also the war of at our European borders, I can say that our mission is not easy, and to add, let's say, more pressure on all of us, I look at the figures for the future showing that in 2050 we will reach 10 billion people on Earth, and also the fact that we will need around 13,000 buildings to accommodate the population, the new population, to accommodate human activities, in fact, accommodate 90% of our living lives. I was asked a few days ago during an interview, what REHVA does in order to tackle the energy crisis? How do we play our leading role in the very complicated geopolitical and energetic context? And I explained that we don't directly save energy. Of course, in our homes, at the office, all of us save energy and save resources. But we are engineers, we are architects, we are scientists and practitioners taking care of real and technical and feasible solutions for the energy consumption reduction, for the cut down of CO2 emissions, and also for the increase of renewable energy sources uses in buildings. Coming back to our agenda today, we will tackle very actual topics, zero emission buildings, and the one of the most important European Commission program, REPowerEU. We will have two sections. The first one, it will be moderated by myself, and in the second part of the day there will be a discussion. There are several presentations scheduled, and there will be also a discussion about the same REPowerEU and building decarbonization, the path between dreams and reality. I will refer further to only to EPBD, so you know probably that REHVA followed very closely this topic. We released 5 position papers starting from March 2021, and the last one was released in July 2022. I will end my short speech for the opening of this REHVA summit, kindly asking all the speakers to stick to the scheduled program. We will have a Q&A session at the end of this first day, of the first half of the day. Maybe we can accept one exception because we have a very special guest today, and he needs to leave right after his speech. We can take 1 or maximum 2 questions for Mr. Bușoi. But before that, I have, of course, it's my duty to express my gratitude first to the REHVA team organizing this event. Then, of course, to our member associations and supporters, making possible to have our federation. And, of course, finally, to our guests who accepted to present and to tackle the main topics in Europe, but not only in Europe. So the first speaker is Mr. Cristian Bușoi, member of the European Parliament and chair of the Committee on Industry, Research and Energy, known also as ITRE committee. Mr. Bușoi is a contributor to many plenary debates on current energy initiatives, such as Renewable Energy Directive, carbon offset, and gas storage. Mr. Bușoi claims that his mission is to ensure that ITRE will be the main engine of change to achieve the decarbonization target and the transition to a green, circular economy without jeopardizing the Union's energy security or competitiveness, and very importantly, without eliminating jobs. So I will invite Mr. Bușoi to take the floor and give us a speech, the weighted speech. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Lungu. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, dear guests. It is an honor for me today to be here and to take this opportunity. I would like to take this opportunity to thank your president, Mr. Lungu, and also especially Mr. Doboshi, representing the Romanian Association, for inviting me. Indeed, I'll have to go back to the parliament because we have a very difficult negotiation, discussion between different commissions, different committees in the European Parliament to establish who is responsible for the joint procurement in the defense sector. That's why at 10:30 I will have to leave this very interesting conference. But clearly, I would like to transmit a very clear message from European Parliament and from Industry, Research and Energy Committee that I'm chairing. From a climate perspective, the need to address the built environment is clear. Without tackling this area, we will not achieve climate neutrality in 2050 as defined by our laws. I just want to remind you that in its resolution in 2020 on the European Green Deal, the Parliament called, in addition, for a revision of the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, the issue that will be discussed this morning at your conference. The renovation wave also recognizes that buildings are responsible for about 40% of the EU's energy consumption, and 36% of the GHG emissions from energy, but only around 1% of the building stock is renovated each year. So the rate is very low. The aim of this strategy was to at least double renovation rates in the next 10 years and make sure that renovations lead to higher energy and resource efficiency. Hence, the main objective of the recast of EPBD are to substantially reduce the emissions and finally energy consumption in the building sector by 2030 and to set a long-term vision for EU building sector that is climate neutral by 2050. So, yes, European Parliament was ready, and even if there are some divisions, and now we have some debates inside the Parliament and inside ITRE committee that are calling for the postponement of the whole file because of the economic crisis and the crisis of high energy prices. I would like to reassure you that in this moment, the ITRE committee is very much determined to finalize the negotiations, and we are supporting the rapporteur and shadows in this endeavor. There is a momentum to legislate to decrease dependency of Russian gas in line with the emergency measures on energy savings. With the war in Ukraine, Europe is in the midst of an energy crisis that is causing inflation to skyrocket. Even after the crisis will be over, gas prices will, for the near future, stay significantly higher than before 2022. At least these are the most of the forecasts, and this is what the industry is saying to us. With this new normal, there will be a need to help households not only during this winter, but also during the new normal for however long it lasts. This new baseline is projected to hit people in worse performing buildings, much times harder than people in an efficient building. That's why efficient buildings will really help citizens and industries to cope with this new reality. That's why we need to advance in our negotiations. As highlighted by the REPowerEU plan, energy efficiency is crucially important for addressing the energy and climate crisis. Every opportunity to save energy must be considered. The energy efficiency potential of technical building systems needs to be fully harvested by policies addressing individual products and by those focusing on the entire building. As it is also highlighted by the REPowerEU, we need to deploy renewables. The new renewable target, the cornerstones of an amended RED directive, the Renewable Energy Directive 4 and 5, under Rule 122, the last European Commission initiative. And this morning I opened the trilogue negotiations that is taking place just now between European Parliament and the Council with the participation of European Commission to finalize the debates on the Renewable Energy Directive modification. The process of replacing fossil fuels with renewable energy sources and other zero carbon solutions in the heating and cooling sector has so far been slower than in electricity generation, as renewables currently provide only 24% of that consumption. 50% of global energy consumption is wasted in the form of heat. I would like to focus on the heating system and installations a bit, as what we can apply to heat, we can invert to cooling systems as well. For the heat processes in building sector and the intake of renewables, at the moment we have some intake and status. First, bioenergy that leads in renewable heat consumption in buildings, used mainly in wood and pellet stoves and boilers, as well as in district heating networks, for which municipal waste and biomass comprise the majority of renewable supply. Then, of course, we have the renewable electricity as the second largest renewable energy commodity used for heat in buildings after bioenergy, and you know well, electric heaters, boilers, and heat pumps for buildings. Thirdly, we have heat pumps for ambient heat, which are also an increasingly important renewable heat source. Finally, of course, we could use the potential of solar and thermal, used essentially for domestic water heating and geothermal heat, of which almost 60% is harnessed by ground source heat pumps. The central role of heating and cooling in energy transition has been recognized under the European Green Deal's Climate Target Plan and Fit for 55 package, and is continuing to play an important role via the increased role of renewable energy shares in this large sector, without which the EU's energy and climate target, as I said at the beginning, cannot be achieved. We cannot achieve our strategic targets without really addressing and reforming, changing in this direction, the heating and the cooling sector. Last but not least, I would also like to reflect on an aspect that I find important, on the district heating and the district approach proposed in the Parliament. This approach reflects the local need and includes the core principle of system efficiency, which will allow each member state to apply cost-effective solutions in decarbonization of the building stock by enabling local and regional authorities to develop targeted strategies. This gives a broader view than just individual buildings. District approach should improve cost effectiveness, therefore should be based on the principles of technically, functionally, and economically feasibility. We need to understand that there is no solution that fits all. The district approach will allow member states the flexibility needed to advance the renovations and also the solutions that are proper for each situation, as we see many different situations in different member states, especially in Central and East Europe, but not only. Last but not least, renovation of our building stocks reduces both the energy footprint of buildings and the energy costs for households, while also boosting economic activity and job creation. So there is a strong commitment of European Parliament, of ITRE committee to advance with the Fit for 55, with the Green Deal agenda. Of course, we have REPowerEU that also bring significant input to these strategies and legislative files, as REPowerEU will not only allow us to phase out, to get rid of the Russian gas and Russian imports, but also with strong support for renewables, for energy efficiency, and also for hydrogen, will help us to reach easier our strategic targets, Fit for 55 and Green Deal, and will assure to European industries and European citizens decent prices and less volatility, and will not be dependent on the geopolitical weapons, as unfortunately we are experiencing now with the Russian gas. Thank you so much. A lot of success in your activity, and I'm in constant and permanent contact and collaboration with Mr. Lungu, with Mr. Doboshi. So all your work will be supported in the European Parliament. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Bushoi, for your speech, interesting speech. I have a short question for you. I said before that REHVA followed very closely the path of EPBD drafted project for the recast, and we would like to give more help to ITRE in order to take the most correct decisions. And my question is, how can we help ITRE more in depth, more closely? Because REHVA, in fact, gathers the knowledge for HVAC systems, not only HVAC, but also for energy efficiency, energy performance of buildings, for renewable resources. And that's why we have a lot of information to share with the political level.
Thank you so much. In ITRE committee, we always take very much into account the input from industry, from relevant stakeholders, as we are also the committee for industry. So much more than other committees, I don't want to criticize in ENVI committee, sometimes reluctant for the industry, but very committed on those goals that now we are sharing. Another committees, ITRE is really very, very sensitive to the input. So any input is welcomed. I know that until now, we received a lot of information and suggestions for amendments. What we should do now is, first of all, and Elisabetta will help us, my chief of staff, will help us to assess the current situation, to look what is now, what are the main compromises and main lines that most probably will be the final outcome. Look a little bit together with this. The rapporteur is Mr. Kelly, no? Yes, it's Mr. Kelly, which is a colleague from European People's Party Center, right? So I can also, I try to be very concrete and practical. I can also moderate, and I can also facilitate contact and discussion with him. Look on what was already discussed and what are already the points of convergence, because we cannot go back to the initial phase. And looking there what we could efficientize, what we could improve. And if it's something really hurting the industry, or it's not really applicable, too optimistic or less ambitious that we could achieve, clearly we could improve this via final discussions.
Okay, thank you so much for the reply. We all know that there are a lot of political decision in these directives, but also we would like to see many other technical aspects implemented. So thank you so much for your presentation. There is a question maybe in the room for, yes.
Well, Jarek Kurnitski, REHVA, DRC. So how do you see, let's say, in the context of the EPBD, what's the role of the renewable energy? So do you see that renewable energy should be promoted, or the approach rather should be like it is in the EED, where we speak about the reduction of the total primary energy? And this is a kind of a question where we see that EPBD is quite flexible. So in the national implementation, you can go so that you will promote renewable energy if you want, or you can go so that all energies are equal, so including fossil gas or solar PV, and just to reduce the total energy use. But what's your position? Which way is should be preferred, and what could be the advice, let's say, how to then implement the EPBD if it is not too specific at the final wording?
Thank you so much. So clearly, the aim of Energy Efficiency Directive, and also in a way of EPBD, is to have more efficiency and less consumption, irrespective if we talk about classical energy, like fossil fuels that you mentioned, or even renewables. The idea is to consume less energy in a more efficient way, and we have to use those materials, construction materials, and also renovation materials, in order that the consumption is less, and also the bills will be less. But clearly, when you talk about the source, because we didn't invent until now something that consumes zero energy. The reduction could be achieved, but still a lot of energy will be consumed by our buildings in our heating and cooling systems in the future also. Of course, the renewables are preferred, as this will help us to reach our climate goals that we really need to reach. And as I said, the negotiation this morning on what we call RED 3, Renewable Energy Directive revision, not the permitting part that we call RED 4 or even RED 5, the last week decision of European Commission. Today, one of the discussions, and maybe they will finalize successful the negotiation, and we'll have a final text in red, will refer to the heating and cooling part and the buildings part. So these three, RED, Energy Efficiency Directive, and of course EPBD, which is specific for the buildings, will have first to align a little bit, not to contradict in between. each will look from a different angle, but clearly we need first to reduce consumption, and then from the consumption that is already reduced, renewable sources should be supported, promoted, even incentivized financially at the beginning before becoming a strong business case.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
If at 10:45 I will not be in the office of Mr. Lange, SEDE committee will take a lot of prerogatives on the, I'm joking, but I have to be there to negotiate for the procurement in the defense sector.
Okay, thank you
so much
for your presence. And we will keep close to your activities, and of course we will get back to your chief of staff to maybe schedule a meeting. Yes.
Thank you so much. A lot of
you.
success.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good. So the next presentation will be about zero emission buildings in the EPBD review. Our distinguished speaker is Paula Rey Garcia, Miss Paula Rey Garcia, Deputy Head of Unit B3 from DGNR. Unit B stands for Just Transition, Consumers, Energy Efficiency and Innovation. She is an important contributor in the buildings and the products sector on topics such as the energy efficient building systems and the better enforcement of efficiency assessment. So Ms. Garcia, please take the floor for your presentation.
Thank you very much for inviting me, and good morning to everybody. It's very nice to also meet in person again, because I think latest meeting that I had participated in was still in only virtual format. So indeed, now after Mr. Bouchoy's introduction, we move into much more detailed issues now with the focus on buildings. And in addition, when we look at heating and cooling, of course, what is also very important is what we are doing on the product side, which is fully complementary to the efforts that we are making through the EPBD. And my colleague from my unit, Philippe Rivière, I understand will be also here in the afternoon to look into some of these issues in much more detail. So, yeah. So how does it fit the revision of the energy performance of buildings directive into what Mr. Bouchoy was explaining? You know, the climate ambition, the new increased target that we have of 55%. And then, of course, the different strategies that were setting, let's say, the overall mandate for this commission, such as the European Green Deal or the renovation wave. So in this regard, it's important to mention that really buildings are fully central to these efforts. So already in the climate target plan that was translating, let's say, the objective of 55% into detailed analysis to underpin the different revisions that are part of the so-called Fit for 55 package, which includes, as Mr. Bouchoy was mentioning, the Energy Efficiency Directive, the Renewable Directive, but also all the revision of the climate legislation that is ongoing. There it was made very clear that buildings really need to be central to this transformation. So the emissions specifically of buildings should be reduced by 60% by 2030, which is something quite significant. Also, their final energy consumption needs to be diminished. And what is also quite important, the consumption for heating and cooling is also requiring some important reduction. And now, of course, with the context of the war in Ukraine, all this becomes even more acute, let's say, because of our dependence, in particular in the heating and cooling sector. In addition, of course, if we look at the building sector, a big majority of the efforts need to come from the existing stock, and that's where the renovation wave fits in, really trying to improve the 1% very low rate that was mentioned right before, and bringing it up quite significantly, and also moving those renovations towards deeper renovations, because that's really the only way we could then deliver on the different targets that we have. So from this framework, what we have then as concrete objectives of the revision of the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive are, on the one hand, to really contribute very significantly to these greenhouse gas emission reduction objectives for the building sector as the main really legal instrument touching the building sector, but then also to give a longer term vision towards 2050. So it was analyzed, and also it was a very clear contribution from stakeholders that the vision that existed in the current directive was, from this perspective, outdated. It was not really having in mind this 2050 objective, and therefore it required also an important revision from that point of view. And this, of course, touches on new buildings, which is something that I will also look at in more detail. So zooming into a bit more detail, then within the revision, in the end, what we have this time around, as opposed to the revision that was part of the clean energy package, is a very fundamental revision of the directive, a very broad one. So in 2018, well, 16-18, with the clean energy package, the main aim was to make sure that the key modernization aspects were introduced, that a strengthened focus on renovation was included, but at the same time there was an effort made to make the revision quite targeted so that implementation would continue in parallel. And this was very important, in particular for the 2020 targets that were included in the directive for nearly zero energy buildings, the progress on energy performance certificates. So we didn't want to put all that on hold, and therefore it was chosen to do a targeted revision. This time around is a very fundamental one. It touches really on all aspects. It's quite a transformation as regards renovation, with the introduction of minimum energy performance standards. It also goes very far as regards the decarbonization of buildings for the reasons that I have explained. It looks very much into the technical building systems, heating, cooling, ventilation, but also into everything that has to do with digitalization, including of everything related to energy performance certificates, infrastructure for sustainable mobility, and finally, but also very important, of course, the link to finance. This is really fundamental, in particular for existing buildings. So this is some of the analysis that we have been doing now in support of the repower work, everything that has to do with the efforts of the Commission with the different emergency measures to really achieve demand reduction, not only diversification of supply, but also demand reduction. And really the aim with this slide is to show that there is really a lot of potential to tap. So really, if we compare the, let's say, the lowest classes, the so-called worst performing buildings, which are a focus of this revision, with, let's say, the top ones, the difference is quite huge. And this, of course, shows in the energy bill. So it's something very relevant to tackle. But then the question is how to do it in practice, and how to also give a very clear signal to the financial sector so that also financing flows into buildings, the renovation, considering that it's also a very granular sector. So it's often, let's say, less attractive from the financial point of view, because it requires quite a lot of effort, of aggregation, of technical assistance, and therefore the signal from the legislative side needs to be then very, very clear, so to make it work. So then moving into really what I was mentioning as the vision for 2050, the role of new buildings, what we have now introduced in the directive is a new, let's say, vision for these buildings, which is the zero emission building, which really, as in the Commission proposal, had a number of benchmarks of what those buildings would consume and what renewable energy they would have embedded, let's say. They have an incentive not only for on-site renewables, which was already the case and is already the case in the current directive, but also for local solutions, as were mentioned in the first presentation, efficient district heating and energy communities, and on these aspects really making a cross reference to the Energy Efficiency Directive and the Renewables Directive, because all these pieces of legislation look into these issues from complementary perspectives and therefore need to be very coherent. It also looks, of course, at the existing stock. So it connects to existing buildings by making this vision for zero emission buildings also, let's say, the end point of a deep renovation over time. And it also looks into some reinforcement of indoor air quality aspects. Currently, the directive only looks at the operation phase of buildings, and now with the revision, there are some initial steps taken towards the consideration of life cycle global warming potential. So really looking at the whole cycle. And then in this regard, what we are doing is to rely very much on the standards that are already there and on the work led by our colleagues in DG Environment in particular, on the levels framework, which has been looking into these issues very closely with industry over already some years. Right now is a calculation, so it's, let's say, an element of information without requirements attached, and focusing on those buildings where it would be, let's say, more feasible to introduce it. So really concentrating in particular on new buildings. And then as part of this vision for zero emission buildings, of course, also everything that has to do with strengthening of e-mobility, sustainable mobility aspects, which were already introduced in the previous amendment, in the 2018 amendment, part of the clean energy package. But now, of course, they need to also be aligned with increased ambition, which is much higher than the one that we had at the time. So as was saying, regarding whole life cycle carbon, then it's really first steps addressing those, but also linking them to national building renovation plans, so that gradually this becomes part of the planning of member states, and informs really the market. I mean, there are some member states that are already quite advanced in this area, but they are so far rather the exception. So we'll see what comes out of the negotiation, because this is one of the aspects that, for instance, Parliament is quite keen on reinforcing, and a number of member states as well. Being an information element, so what is mandatory, as I said, is the calculation, but not, let's say, meeting a certain level. But then, of course, it needs to be linked back into the energy performance certificate, so that in the label for the building, we have this information. It was also mentioned, of course, the impetus that we have with REPowerEU, with a strong support for renewables, for heat pumps, for solar, for energy efficiency. And this has resulted in parallel to the negotiation, but now is fully embedded into the revised CPBD as it is being discussed by Council and Parliament. Is an amendment on solar energy in buildings, a specific one, which has become the new Article 9A of the directive as negotiated, let's say. And here as well, for new buildings is also more ambitious. And it concerns not only, let's say, installations on new buildings, but also a much more thorough consideration at the design phase, so that when a building is being designed, that really the potential for solar energy is maximized, and this is taken into consideration at that point as well. Of course, we also need to look at the feasibility. So for this reason, also the article includes the provision for member states to look into these aspects in more detail and to really set the detailed rules for implementing this article and possible exceptions. But still, this is really, as it was mentioned in the introduction, really important if we are to deliver also on the REHVA objectives and to reduce, of course, dependency from imports of fossil fuels. So really, then to conclude, I mean, these are just elements of what is there now in negotiation. Is really very important in our view that not only a final agreed EPBD gives a very, very strong signal on the renovation of existing buildings, but also that the definition, the final definition and the final obligations on new buildings are strong enough, because this will be what will drive also, we believe, the sector forward. So it will set really the new model. It will also have a strong link to renovation by becoming also the, let's say, end goal over time. So although new buildings are not the main part of the stock, let's say, or of the efforts that we need to undertake according to the climate target plan, still it will have a huge influence on how the transformation of the sector develops over time. So from this perspective and connecting back to what is happening now, so for those of you who follow this more closely, so the Commission made the proposal in December 2021. It has been discussed now in a first phase by Council, and during the current Czech presidency, there was the agreement now on the 25th of October of what is the Council position. That preserves quite some parts of the original Commission proposal, but also weakens some others. And what is now happening now is that the file is now much more now in the Parliament hands for the definition of the Parliament position. As it was mentioned, there was a push, let's say, to postpone the directive, which from the Commission side, we really would raise question marks about, because this is really a directive that is quite central to the efforts that we have now in the context of the energy crisis and of the war in Ukraine. And what we see nevertheless is a slight, let's say, delay in the Parliament calendar, because they need more time to build their position. So in principle, we could have then, let's say, the conclusion of the Parliament position beginning of next year, and then the final, let's say, trilogues that were mentioned, bringing together also Council and Parliament for a final deal, let's say, in the second quarter of next year. So this is in terms of calendar, which I think is also quite important for you and for your members. So it's really towards the Parliament now that is quite important that you make your inputs in regards of this directive. So this was it from my side, but of course happy to get questions now or later if more practical. Thank you.
Maybe later. Thank you for the interesting presentation you gave to our attendees here on site and also online. The next speaker, so we will have that Q&A session at the end of our session, morning session. So the next presentation is about indoor environment and quality and primary energy aspects in zero emission buildings and deep renovation. Jarek Kornicki, our known colleague from REHVA, from TRC committee of our federation. I need to present you, Jarek, even if you are very known the person and the expert. So Jarek Kornicki is the chair of REHVA Technology and Research Committee, a professor at Tallinn University of Technology and Aalto University, and director of the Department of Civil Engineering and Architecture at TalTech. Mr. Kornicki is known as an important contributor in the preparation of technical definitions for nearly zero energy buildings. Other activities include the work in the field of energy efficiency of the built environment in Estonia and Finland, and preparation of the European Residential Ventilation Guidebook as part of a task force. So, Jarek, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you for this comprehensive introduction. And in my presentation, I will try to take a step further to be a bit more technical. So what EPBD means in terms of IAQ and primary energy requirements, and especially what's the situation when you take this on the national level and when start to decide which requirements should be established to be in line with the directive. And indeed, the history is here already quite long. So this is the third revision, and this directive really has developed, and it's comprehensive and also technically complex document. And finally, it is a question how harmonized implementation we can expect on the member states. So if everybody will implement it in its own way, maybe when it's not serving fully the purpose. So it is also important to point out that the energy use in buildings, it's mainly to provide good indoor environmental quality, and as this quality level very remarkably will affect energy use. So when it is highly important to have a specification for the IAQ when we speak about energy performance requirements. And really we can find from the EPBD, for instance, when you make a shirts, you can find healthy indoor environment, healthy indoor climate, comfort, indoor air quality, ventilation. So these are addressed in many places. But it's also quite clear that these explicit requirements regarding the IAQ, these are left on the responsibility of the member states. So primary energy has been the main indicator in the directive, and it is indeed very important for the member states to understand the calculation principles, and for instance when non-renewable or total primary energy factors should be used and how to be used. I will start with IAQ. Now it includes one small but very significant new requirement to equip non-residential zero-emission buildings with measuring and control devices for the regulation of indoor air quality. And this will also apply for major renovation if technically and economically feasible. And very likely it will be when we speak about major renovation, which typically means deep renovation projects where all the HVAC systems or most of them will be anyhow replaced. So this perhaps can be understood as something we know as a demand controlled ventilation control based on the CO2 and temperature. And very likely we can expect that manufacturers will make this number much bigger in the future because currently it's too small. But the importance is increasing. We want to know what's in addition to the room temperature. We want to know what is the CO2 concentration in any, let's say, commonly used spaces in non-residential buildings, and this is something what we can expect in the future, and that would be indeed a nice progress. When it is also stressed in the inspection that standalone ventilation systems should also undergo to the inspection, And inspection scheme requirement includes what the sizing of a ventilation system should be compared with the requirements of the building. Here, once again, there is a reference to the requirements. And yes, these requirements are to specified on national basis because they are not specified in the directive. So it was already in the previous version of the directive that negative effects such as inadequate ventilation should be avoided. So there is no change. This is indeed continuously very important. But now indoor environmental quality is stressed both for the new buildings and major renovations. And it is clearly stated that the issues of the healthy indoor climate conditions shall be addressed in Articles 7 and 8. So this, I would say, also could be interpreted so that the national regulations should be placed for the IAQ and minimum ventilation rates. And why the ventilation is so important? Because the main issue in the directive, as Paula told to us, is this renovation. To boost the deep renovation, to transform the building stock to zero emission by 2050. And if ventilation will fail in the renovation, then indeed consequences can be very serious. So we very well know that additional insulation and replacement of windows will block the air change if ventilation system will not be installed as a part of the renovation. And then you can end up with mold problems and any other IAQ problems. And that's a serious business to be addressed in the implementation of EPBD nationally. And it is very likely that this is also worth to follow how these Article 7 and 8 requirements will be implemented in practice in the member states to be sure that this implementation would be successful. Then I will go to these primary energy requirements. So these apply for the minimum energy performance requirements and also basically for the energy performance certificate scale. And the proposal from 21 of October included some important, let's say, additions. And here we speak about which primary energy to be used, because there is quite unspecific expression of the primary energy, and it's not clarified always, not always, but in some places it's clarified, should it account the total or just the non-renewable primary energy. And this is also important for the energy performance scale. So basically in this procedure, when you take this nationally, I can list 5 steps every member states will need to do to issue all the national requirements required to implement this directive. So first step is to define the assessment boundary. And there are good definitions in the directive saying that assessment boundary is the boundary where delivered and exported energy are measured or calculated. So this assessment boundary definition can depend what's the practice to install energy meters nationally. And there are a couple of practices indeed in Europe, not only the single one. And when delivered energy is clearly defined as energy supplied through the assessment boundary. So this is quite important, and now I have a couple of perhaps complicated technical slides, but this is needed to understand what are the bases in the directive for the primary energy calculation. So this would be one possibility to set assessment boundary. And these energy meters locations are showed with this smart meter here. We also need to distinguish not only to have a grid electricity, but to distinguish nearby electricity and community electricity. And those metering depends on the technical and contractual arrangements. So this metering is not shown in this figure. But basically, if we speak about smart meters when they are two-way meters and can measure both delivered grid electricity and exported grid electricity, and same for the district heat, district cooling. So these exported energy flows are shown with dashed lines because they directly do not have any impact on the energy performance of a building, and typically are not accounted to these primary energy values, but indeed physically they do exist, but the surplus energy flows will be exported to the grid at least. So when with calculating total and non-renewable primary energy, it is said in the definitions quite clearly that primary energy is calculated from the delivered energy, and to calculate non-renewable primary energy is very straightforward. But when we will go to the total primary energy, there are a couple of options. First, to include or not to include ambient heat. And in Article 16, it is basically said that the ambient heat should be excluded. That is not in line with existing overarching standard, but this is clearly fixed in the directive. And then how to calculate on-site photovoltaic or on-site renewable energy production, would that be accounted inside the total primary energy or not? So that would be depend how the assessment boundary will be specified. If that would be so, like it was in the last slide, in this case, on-site renewable energy is not delivered energy because it's not supplied through the assessment boundary, it's inside the assessment boundary, and would not be calculated to total primary energy. So sounds complicated, but this is very important, and especially there is also good hint in the ZEP requirement where total primary energy needs to be covered by on-site nearby renewable or community generated renewable energy, also by effective district heating and cooling, and then finally from carbon-free electricity from the grid. And here also in this requirement, this logic supports that don't put photovoltaic on the both sides of the equations, because in such a case it does not help to cover this total primary energy, referring that the total primary energy is intended to be calculated from the delivered energy, so energy delivered to the building site. And if not so, then it would be very difficult to actually to fulfill this requirement. So when there are also some, let's say, step 2 cost optimal national calculations are needed to set the requirements, and there is some guidance in the Annex 1 what needs to be taken into account when we speak about the numeric indicator of primary energy use. And Annex 1 also requires to recognize benefits from the district heating, cooling, and also positive influence from the renewable energy generation. I will show one example. It is published in the REHVA journal, and I'm not going to the details, but basically this can be taken in a cold climate, in the Nordic climate zone, as a cost optimal data, or can be at least close to the cost optimal data. And the calculation is conducted with 3 heat sources. It's with district heat, effective district heat, actually, air to water heat pump, and gas boiler. And then compare them how the requirements based on these calculations could be nationally set. So what is important to understand is the summary in this slide. For instance, to the air to water heat pump, we can see that the energy use of this all electric building will be covered partly by the solar photovoltaic, and the rest is from the grid. And we also export something to the grid, but we don't account this exported energy. And here the calculation of non-renewable primary energy and total primary energy will just go with different factors. Default factors from the overarching standard are used in this example. So we get non-renewable and total primary energy values for all cases. And in the case of district heat or gas boiler, when indeed this there is another delivered energy, what is either the district heat or gas, and it is good to notice that it's quite interesting that district heat provides the highest total primary energy value, close to 89, and at the same time the smallest non-renewable primary energy value compared to all of these cases. So it very much will depend which calculation way with which primary energy factors would be selected to set these cost optimal requirements. And if we would use a total primary energy to set national requirements, then to enable the use of effective district heat, we need to take this highest possible value. So it cannot be smaller than 89, and then the gas boiler and air to water heat pump will very easily comply with this requirement. But when making so, being based on the total primary energy, when we did not actually follow the requirements what are in the Annex 1 to take into account the positive effect of renewable energy. And for that purpose, additional numeric indicator must be set, and in this case, a non-renewable primary energy, when the value 63 can be used to make possible to use both air to water heat pump and district heat and block the gas heating. And in the conclusion, we see that if we will go with a total primary energy, then this will enable to use of all of these free heat generation systems, including the gas boiler. But if we will go with non-renewable, then only air to water heat pump and district heat can be used. So it can be actually concluded that this total primary energy would be redundant in this case, and it is enough to use only one indicator with non-renewable primary energy indicator. And we have also this requirement that total primary energy needs to be covered. So in the case of air to water heat pump, photovoltaic was not enough to cover this. And especially because the default primary energy factor for the grid electricity was so high. So with calculating with this 2.5 ends up to very high value. So the requirement is not satisfied, but for the effective district heat case, it is satisfied. When we also tried to do the calculation with 2030 EU electricity BEF values, which are 1.6, and then also slightly increasing the photovoltaic when it was possible to satisfy this requirement also for air to water heat pumps. So it is basically possible to fulfill also this requirement in the future when the electricity generation will develop as expected. And finally, the last step, also energy performance certificate classes have to be defined, and one purpose of the EPBD is to harmonize these EPC scales. And when it is quite clearly said that the total primary energy needs to be used, so we end up with a situation where non-renewable primary energy can be applied for the minimum requirements, but for the EPC classes, directive says that these should be based on the total PEF in the current version. So to conclude, IAQ is addressed, but explicit requirements are on the responsibility of the member states, and very likely this new requirement for zero emission buildings can really make an improvement in the construction. And it would be nationally quite difficult to be in line if IAQ requirements and ventilation requirements do not exist. So hopefully EPBD will provide a clear message to have these requirements available at national level. And when these energy analysis showed that non-renewable primary energy indicator can be used for the requirements, but for the EPC scale, total primary energy has been used. And there are quite many factors what are needed to issue these national requirements. So we need non-renewable primary energy factors. That has been actually the current practice in most of the member states. Then we need to have a biomass factor. That also has been a current practice, because this cannot be calculated with a non-renewable factor. And then we need to have a total PEF for EPC classes, which are currently not present, at least in the most of the member states, when this carbon-free electricity factor is new, so that the nuclear can be also accounted to this in addition to renewable energy. And finally, CO2 emission factors to calculate the operational CO2, but these have been also in use already in many countries. Finally, there is also a small escape route in the directive. So in the Annex 1, it is specified that alternatively to the primary energy factors, it's possible to use the weighting factors for the numeric indicator of the primary energy. So, and this could provide indeed more flexibility on the national basis if this set long list of all factors needed seems to be a bit overkill, and indeed it's important that the engineers will understand how the calculation will go and the correct factor will be applied in correct place, and the same for national regulators to understand and to not to make the system too overcomplicated. But it's quite complicated question. So thank you. That was my presentation.
Okay, thank you, Jarek, for your 20 minutes short course. It was very clear. Maybe now we will need the seminar scheduled with you to explain more in depth what was said and written in your presentation. Anyhow, I say that breakthrough ideas need some time to be implemented. Maybe we will have a chance to discuss with ITRE and do something, but I'm afraid that maybe it's too late, but let's see what discussion will be. Thank you again. We switch to the next speaker, who is Mr. Benjamin Haas, Director of Regulatory Affairs at ENGIE. Mr. Haas has important contributions as a project manager for scientific research and development at lab Crygen in the field of the regulation of energy and environmental performance of the buildings. So, Mr. Haas, please take the floor.
Thank you, everyone. And if can switch on the slides. Thank you for having me, and thank you for the invitation. And I'm glad to speak about the regulation, the French regulation for the energy performance of building in France, which includes some life cycle analysis. Will I have the slides on the?
I think in a few moments.
Okay.
Marie is working on that. So,
okay, so
you have to keep the attention of the
no problem.
In the meanwhile,
no problem with that. So I will be talking about the French regulation. However, I'm not representing the French administration. I'm representing ENGIE, and I have a slide of introduction about the company, but I'm quite sure that many of you knows this company, especially in Belgium. But the reason why I will be talking to you about that is also that I've been involved now. It's been more than 10 years, almost 15 years in my previous missions in the fields of the regulation of building energy performance. So before ENGIE, I was at the CSTB, the Scientific Center, which works with the public administration for setting up the regulation. And when I started at NG at the research center, I also worked on the subject and with quite some of you. So I have this double point of view somehow. So I have the point of view of the guy who worked with the public administration, and also the point of view of my company that also, of course, I'm representing here. Do you want me to switch on my laptop because the slides are? Oh, okay. Up. And it shouldn't be up. Coming in. It always needs a bit of time to switch on, but generally it works at the end. Here it should be shared. I have the red light on the dongle, but nothing on the screen. No. Sorry for the delay. It's in the REHVA mail, right? Almost there. Yes. Full screen. Okay, perfect. Sorry for the delay. Let's go on. So very quick introduction on the company. I think it's important that you know what I represent here. That NG is energy utility, focusing on 30 countries. We'll be wider than that before. We're focusing these days with 4 major core activity with the goal of achieving zero carbon by 2045. And I think it's important because we worked on that 5 years already for the ultimate goal of 2050. With this 4 core activity, renewable production, so renewable production with respect to these 3 energy vectors, green gas included, hydrogen, biogas, electricity, with some figures that you can read, and I will not repeat what on the screen, and also heat. Namely here is district heating. So on these 3 vectors, we aim at quite significant increase, at least significant For LG, we have a lot of activity in the field of infrastructure, gas, electricity, and district heating. We are a major player in energy efficiency solutions for residential and non-residential sector, and also in thermal electricity production. I won't go to the detail, it's not our topic here, and also energy supplies to B2B and B2C sector. This is to set the picture a little bit. Okay, reaching zero carbon in buildings. It's the roadmap from the point of view of ENGIE is the first 3 bullet point. Do I have a pointer here? Or no pointer? I will use that. Sorry, I thought it was off. Previous slide. Okay. So to decarbonize, I will be focusing on new buildings. Important point, because the topic is life cycle analysis, and in France we have implementation of life cycle analysis in the regulation for new building only, and I have an opening for existing buildings. So all these slides will be focusing on new buildings. So the roadmap, as we see it at ENGIE for decarbonizing the new building, it's in 3 steps, but something you're familiar with: energy demand reduction, energy efficiency, then first principle, and third step, using renewable energy. And if I focus on the French regulation for new building, which is enforced since early 2022, with some disclaimers at the bottom of the slide, because to date, not all sectors that are covered, but they will be covered. It works very schematically in 3 steps. So we have a first step of limiting the heating and lighting needs. We have a second step, limiting total and non-renewable energy production. So I think it's an interesting point given the previous discussion that we had, and also with the representative of the Commission. And the third step, which is limiting carbon emission evaluated in life cycle analysis. So I want to focus on these 2 points. I won't go into the details of the limitation of heating and lighting needs. And so the limitation in the energy use is done in primary energy in agreement with the EPBD. So we have the first hurdle, which is the total primary consumption, which encompasses all energy that can be metered. So I wrote invoiced, but I think it's more or less the same thing, meaning that, for example, on-site solar is considered as free. And why this first step is considered as important, and why don't we only focus on non-renewable energy? I would say 2 things. First thing is that renewable energy is not to be wasted. But of course, if you use only total primary energy, you end up with some issues that have been presented in the previous presentation. But using total primary energy has a big advantage. Also, it allows to avoid that the energy efficiency of the building is being decreased thanks to the use of renewable. And having these 2 steps articulated allows to put inside the building only efficient system. So for example, if you don't use total primary energy, and if you use primary energy factor, for example, for 0.2 for nuclear, in France, you will have direct electric heaters everywhere, which was more or less what was done in the 80s and the 90s, and it's catastrophic. Won't go into the detail of what, but this is typically what happens. So this is why these 2 steps are very interesting. And in France, so they relies on primary energy factor, of course. So some of you are aware of this European standard that we've been working on with some colleagues in the room that set up a comparison framework for the calculation of primary energy factor. For electricity, the factor that is used in France is a prospective factor, prospective up to 2035 of 2.3. So what is interesting to remark here is that the current factor is 2.9, and historical primary energy factor for other energy vectors. So interesting to note here that you don't have a level playing field. So here, an interesting question that I ask myself, and also I think it's important when it comes to comparing what is a class A and a class A and F class in the various EPCs. How do you compare the regulation between one another? And especially, how do you compare the French regulation with the European regulation? If you take an F class with a given figure, given the fact that it depends on primary energy factor that, as you can see, are not necessarily consistent with one another, not mentioning that the rules of calculation behind them may be different, may differ between countries, but also climate is very specific. The computing kernel is very specific. French computing kernel is different from others, etc., and etc. So it's difficult to compare. So it's important when it comes to compare all these F class, A class, to have in mind that the underlying hypotheses are very different between countries. So as I said, not representing the French administrator, and it's interesting also to have our point of view, but you already got it, I think, that ENGIE is in favor of a level playing field, that the hypotheses behind all these primary energy factors are consistent for all energy vector, and also strongly in favor of energy first principle, so using efficient system, and the total primary energy consumption is a hurdle which is useful in order to be sure that only efficient system will be installed in the building. Second step, carbon emission in life cycle analysis. So this was the third step in my three hurdles that I showed in the first slide. So what about the emission of the materials sector? So according to the IEA, you can find the figures in their reports, the building industry, I mean, constructing the building themselves, represents around 30% of the carbon emission of buildings, so 70% being the energy use on a yearly basis. So this is the situation, and this is why this figure is very important. If it comes to new building only, so it would be slightly different calculation, but it would represent between 50% for a fossil gas fuel building to 80% of the carbon intensity in life cycle of the building. So definitely for new building, if you don't go to life cycle analysis, you miss the elephant in the room. And what I would add also beyond these slides is that this elephant is crucial because these are emissions that are emitted when the building is delivered, not over 50 years. So you don't have the room to reduce the carbon footprint of your energy vector in 10, in 20, in 40, in 50 years. This 50% for gas fossil fuel doesn't happen in 50 years. They happen in 2 years. So this is why it's absolutely key to tackle. So in the French regulation, so once again, for new building, we address the carbon impact in this life cycle approach, and we consider the carbon emission for construction, operation, energy use, slightly the same thing, but they are differentiated, and decommissioning of the building with 2 thresholds. So we have a threshold with a limitation on the carbon emission due to energy use, so heating, cooling, lighting, ventilation, you're familiar with this, and a limitation on the carbon emission due to construction, operation, and decommissioning of the building, taking into account that some systems have to be changed over the 50 years of the period of assessment that is used in France. Important things to note is that in France, and it's a debate right now, this is why I wanted to highlight this, all this is without considering market-based tool. So everything related to green certificates is out. It's only for the experts. It's a location-based approach. It's not a market-based approach. And therefore, if in creating your cement or in your energy use, you want to show the advantage of financing the renewable energy production, you can't at this stage. PPA is a bit different. Which may be an issue, and I know that it's quite a complicated issues, and once again we will not be going into detail of that. But the industrials and buildings that will want to promote to help the production of new energy renewable facilities, they won't be able, if it's through green certificates, to show that in their final carbon balance. Conclusion and openings here. So the French, did I wondering if I missed something? No, maybe not. So the French, so RE 2020, regulation energy, the R and the E are for regulation energy, the other way around. So goes beyond the current EPBD in that respect, maybe not the next EPBD, with an LCA analysis for CO2 emission, which I think is a very efficient tool. I did not go into the details of how it works in practice. Yeah, afterward we can discuss about that, but I didn't want to go into technical details. LCA is also a mindset for me, because the interesting thing behind it is that it requires a holistic reasoning. For example, there are discussions these days on banning fossil fuel boilers. However, if you work in LCA, you also realize that behind your electricity, you have gas plants, or you have also fossil fuel plants in general. And banning a direct use of fossil fuel would require consistently to ban the indirect use of fossil fuel, which is a bit more difficult to do. We have ideas, because in any case, we have to go to zero in the use of fossil fuels, fossil fuel, direct or indirect. And thus, for us, the energy first principle remained the main pillar in order not to transfer any significant impact beyond the scope of analysis. And this is where LCA help. Primary energy factor also, by the way. An opening about existing building. For new building, it's rather simple if you have the databases, if you have the computing tool to do LCA, because you have all the materials that are used. This is something which is rather simple to get, and if you have the databases in order to link these materials to this environmental impact, the job is done. And we have the database in France in order to do that. It's independent from levels, but it's something that works. However, if you go to residential building, there it becomes more complicated, because the impacts of removing materials, for example, all this is very, very difficult to evaluate, and maybe a more operational position will be not to push to LCA, but to push towards circular economy and reuse of materials that are extracted from the building. So definitely a different approach, but at some point it has to be tractable, and this may be for renovation a more tractable approach than LCA that will be very, very, very difficult, and especially for all the very small scale renovation, single family houses, and etc. Okay, and through with my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Benjamin, for the presentation. I will invite you to take your place and wait for the Q&A session. The last speaker of this morning session is Ms. Haas with another interesting subject. Again, zero emission building, but linked to some other preoccupation, meaning the green building certification schemes. Ms. Ursula Hartenberger is the Secretary General of CPEA, Climate Positive European Alliance. She has extensive expertise in applying sustainable development principles in real estate and construction, with an extensive network at EU, UN, and industry level. She is former member of the EU Technical Expert Group on Sustainable Finance, responsible for drafting technical screening criteria for building sectors. So the floor is yours.
Thank you for the kind introduction. And thank you for the kind invitation to speak at this REHVA event. Just a few words about the climate. Whoops. Obviously, that was not correct. Yeah, about the climate positive Europe allies, and the stress is very much on climate positive. We are a small non-for-profit association based here in Brussels, and you can see at the bottom the founding member logo. So it's basically 4 green building councils from across Europe, and we're very pleased that REHVA is also one of our founding members, and therefore I feel especially honored to be able to speak here today. So our core mission really is to transform markets, the construction and real estate markets, towards more sustainable market practices. And the stress here very much is on market, because we really much work with a bottom-up approach. We want to be sort of an interface. We're an interface between industry and policy, and we want to bring policy, explain policy to the market, to our members, and also bring the market expertise and insights on policy developments back to policy makers. Today, I'm going to talk about how certification systems are engaging with the zero emissions target and the Commission's climate target plan. And given that these 4 green building councils from Denmark, from Germany, from Spain, and from Austria all work with the DGNB system, I've taken the liberty on focusing on the DGNB system. Of course, fully cognizant that there are a number of other certification schemes in operation also in European markets. So just a few words about the DGNB certification for those of you who are not familiar with that. Basically, DGNB stands for Deutsche Gesellschaft für nachhaltiges Bauen, which means German Sustainable Building Country in a free kind of translation. The DGNB was founded in 2007. It's based in Stuttgart in Germany, and it has about 1,600 members. But it does not just certify in Germany alone, but also in around 35 countries. How does that work? It basically means that depending on the requirements, the local requirements, whenever certificates are awarded outside of Germany, the DGNB adapts a certification system to local requirements. The DGNB works very closely with local institutions. It has a DGNB academy and has now trained experts in sustainable building in roughly 40 countries worldwide. And also in terms of imparting knowledge, it's involved in university partnerships in 10 countries, and we regularly partner also in research projects. So before I go into the initiatives that the DGNB is currently involved in or initiating in terms of zero emission buildings, just a very quick reminder of what we're up against. These are figures for Germany, but I guess that they would be very much representative for other countries in Europe as well. So 35% of national CO2 emissions in Germany come from energy consumption in buildings, and 7% of national CO2 emissions resulting from materials and equipment, site and end of life. And the figures that you can see here, they're very much inclusive. So we're not just looking in terms of the manufacture of building materials. We're not just looking at the figures nationally, but also, at where these CO2 emissions come from elsewhere. So in other countries, if the production is elsewhere. And there we have the focus on the operation of the buildings. So basically, this very much sets the scene from what for what I will now be talking about in terms of initiatives to address these rather staggering figures. So first, I'd like to introduce you to the Klima Plus package for DGNB certification. It has been developed to increase the ambition for ongoing projects by motivating project developers through a number of numerous bonuses that are related to the DGNB system. So basically, it focuses on climate neutral operation, increasing the share of renewable energy sources, motivating and promoting for the creation of climate protection roadmaps, increase the energy production on site, and also an analysis of climate risk. So this applies to the current DGNB system for new buildings, for renovation, buildings in use, and also district certification. So, and in addition to the Klima Plus initiative, the DGNB also developed a framework for carbon neutral buildings and sites. So there are two core elements designed to create more clarity and transparency for market participants. A, the definition of carbon neutrality. What does that actually mean? And then also it provides effective, explains what does it actually mean to have an effective approach and an effective strategy for greenhouse gas emissions. And I will now go into a little bit more detail. It consists of 4 core parts. Yeah, this, the climate action strategy. So we have here part 1 covers the CO2 accounting. Part 2 covers the development of climate action roadmaps for individual buildings. Then the reporting via a climate pass, and then also verification processes. So let me start with part 1, which is obviously logical. So that's the accounting. So for the accounting, the DGNB developed a core definition. And the definition elements you can see here on the slides. So there is the zero CO2 emissions goal, and is balanced at 0 or less than 0 greenhouse emission for all types of building. Then the total energy balance takes the total energy balance as a basis. So building energy and user energy must be considered together, so you don't split that up. And then it looks at the actual CO2 intensity. All energy sources are considered with the CO2 emissions generated. And if CO2 emissions are actually avoided, so any excess energy generated at the property enters accounting as a credit. Yeah, CO2 certificates from elsewhere cannot be counted. So that's the accounting part of the framework. Now, this is just sort of a practical example how this works in construction. So basically, you have here the site, but the whole accounting takes also into account the product stage and the end of life stage. And the same goes for, applies here, a practical example for operation. Looks also at indirect emissions, direct emissions, and again, the credits that I already mentioned for operation. Moving on to part 2, this is it's a core element of the framework. That is the development of the climate action roadmap. Because the DGNB very much feels that climate action and associated investments must be planned in a focused manner. Because only if you define clear objectives for buildings and sustain these objectives and implement associated measures in a future-oriented manner, can you actually optimally combine climate action and economic viability of the investment. So I've already said that this climate action roadmap has to be done for each individual building. So you cannot take a cluster of buildings and do that. You have to really take the effort to do this for each building individually. So the creation of this climate action roadmap consists of the different steps. So first, step one would be determining the initial condition. Step two, you look at potential analysis for relevant focus area where you want to focus on your climate roadmap. Then you do the cost assessment of the measures, then the time planning of the measures and determining targets for that building. Step 5 is the documentation and quality assurance of the creation of the climate roadmap. And step 6 would be determining responsibilities and planning the first implementation steps for that building. And very closely linked to that, obviously, part 3 is then the CO2 reporting by means of a climate action passport. And this, the passport would then contain the following information: a short description of the building, the total balance of greenhouse gas emissions. Then it would describe the relative key metrics using a suitable reference value, such as CO2 emissions per user, per unit of area, per hotel room, and so forth. And if a climate action roadmap like the one that I just described also is applied, you would also look at, it would also state the compliance with interim target values or any deviation from these values. So now for the final part, it's very important, of course, you can do all sorts of things, but if you don't verify and if you, if you don't verify whether you've actually achieved what you set out to do, it's pretty meaningless. So of course, that's why you would have the verification and the quality assurance, and you get then incentives for more climate action with D, G, and B certification. So now my final slide, it very much picks up on the rather depressing figures that I showed at the beginning for Germany. So ideally, what we want to get to really is through what the DGNB wants to achieve through this, the framework, but also the Klimapuls initiatives, is to get from the largest source of CO2 to becoming an integral part of the energy transition by being CO2 neutral or even operate in a positive way, and by turning buildings into real CO2 sinks. And to help market participants, there are a number of tools, a number of pieces of guidance available on the DGNB website. So you have here sort of capacity building and knowledge transfer elements that support those initiatives. So there's the, sorry, I can't read that. The toolbox, Klimaneutrales Bauen. I'm not sure whether that's also available in English, but it is worth checking out. So this is the toolbox, climate neutral consumption. And with this, I conclude my presentation and look forward to any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Ursula, for your presentation and for that strong conclusion that the time is now to act. So we can now initiate our question and answers session. But before, I have to say that REHVA is preparing a new position paper, maybe two versions of one position paper. The first one gathering all technical details and presented also to be understood by the scientific and technical world, and the other translated in simple words in order to be understood by the political level. So this new position paper will, let's say, underline the modifications we will need to see maybe for the next revision on EPB content itself. Then another important aspect of EPBD is the transposition phase of this directive. focusing also on a common methodology for the calculation of energy performance in buildings. And then another very, let's say, vivid topic is the training and qualification. So we need experts in order to put in place everything we discuss and we, let's say, have on our tables in order to reach all targets. Okay, so if you have questions for our distinguished guests, please, we can start this session. 20 minutes, we have a short delay of 10 minutes. We can take, there is 10 minutes from the lunch break. So, yes, please.
Thank you. Livia Mazzarella, Vice President of REHVA, a full professor in the University of Milan. I have a general question, which is for all speakers, let me say that, because, no, it's very easy. Because what I've seen now in all presentation, that there is a, first of all, as Jarek Krasniewski said, there's missed one important parameter, indoor air quality. Indoor environmental quality, because we can reduce to really zero energy, energy consumption if you go back to the caves, no problem at all. But the point is not to go back to the caves. Then we have to be sure that we maintain a certain indoor environmental quality level, and I see a SRI, which is maybe useful, but I don't see any indicator for indoor environmental quality. This is a very important point. The second point I would like that some of the speaker could ask is that the main confusion about total primary energy use. Because I see also that in France now we have total primary billed energy, no, instead of total primary physical energy in the normal. Okay, but this is one keyword, because then people hearing total primary energy, built total primary energy, think that the total primary energy is just only the built total primary energy, and so on. This is making a lot of confusion because, first of all, it's simple to show physically, that you can have two buildings with the same amount of primary energy use, which have completely different CO2 production. And because of the goal of the APBD 1, 2, 3 is clearly stated, is CO2 production. And we are moving with the next evolution of APBD to zero, nearly zero, net zero. We will see CO2 building. Then in that case, or emission building, in that case, it's clear that we have to work with such source of energy and conversion, which are producing CO2. And almost all renewable energy sources in their use conversion don't produce CO2, just only biomass, but then it is a so-called compensation law, etc. Then why to increase confusion to use total primary energy when we can just increase efficiency in our system? Very simple keyword, increase efficiency. That means few losses in all process and limiting, if you like, to reduce the overall energy use, to work with the energy needs. We have such nice standardized keywords in standard, ISO standard today, CERN standard, energy use, and energy needs. Energy needs to just work on the envelope and so on. I just finished. That, you see, is a very large question to anyone.
So who wants to reply from the speakers? Okay, maybe replying, yeah.
In France, the fact that we use total primary energy, which is built, it's not new. It's always been the case. First remark, but I completely agree with the view that it has to be clear to everyone. And then it can also be a matter of where do you put the perimeter? Because if the PV is inside the perimeter, then no problem. But you could have other problems. But if it's inside the perimeter, it's logical. So if you put the perimeter at the level of the metering, then it makes sense completely. That was my first point. I was thinking of something else that I lost.
So, Livio, can you repeat the other questions, because it is.
Exactly the problem. Where we put the perimeter, that means we have to standardize weight of that. On the other way, we will have different results. And the other problem is how you are going to calculate the primary energy factor. If you put 1 for renewables, that makes sense. Where depends where you put the boundary again. You know, that's the problem.
And I wanted to complement with the why, the history behind that. Why are we talking only about methods, builds, energy? Maybe it's historical. At the beginning, after the oil peak crisis in the 70s, the goal of all these regulations was to reduce the energy price for end consumers. So they started to work, at least in France, we have an history where we started to work with the energy price themselves. Then we switched to a primary energy with primary energy factor that somehow magically reflects the ratio of gas price and electrical price. But there was always this idea in mind to reduce the invoice to the end consumer. And so this is why the link with method build energy, I think, is here also. And it's important to keep that in mind, not to lose that at some point. It has also to have a positive economical impact to the end user. And it has to be encompassed in all this regulation also. It makes it all the more complicated, I agree.
Okay, Jarek, please.
Yeah, just a short comment. I think now maybe this is a kind of improvement in the EPBD, but this boundary is better specified, and it is possible to define so where you have these energy meters in reality installed, what is indeed not following what we have in the European standards right now in the calculation, but still this is something what was not previously so clearly defined. And in this case, this French approach is completely in line with EPBD definitions. When you take a assessment boundary and the SPV is inside the assessment boundary, no problem, no need to account to the total primary energy delivered to the assessment boundary. But we need to be accurate what we mean, because this total primary energy can have also many meanings, and in EED there is one meaning, but anyhow this is very much, let's say, energy product based approach also followed in EED. But at the same time we need to account photovoltaic on the renewable energy, what is very important for the renewable energy statistics and the RED directive. So we need to make these distinctions in the calculations, but when the definitions are well set, it should not be a problem.
But the problem is that in the standard is inconsistent. The picture is different from the table. In the picture, we have that the PV system, solar system, wind system are out of the assessment boundary, while we have 1 as a primary energy factor in the table. This is a historical reason Johan can explain, was just a mistake. Well, that's the point. We have a wrong standard, and then we have wrong law, and then we have wrong up twice squared applications.
But the standards
not very nice wrong. Conclusion coming
directive
from
never is wrong. Directive by law it's right. When you can improve a standard, this is not the problem.
I have to ask the attendants if there are other questions. Yes, we have questions in the. And then yes, we saw. Yeah.
Oh, hi there, Michael Neves from ECOS, the Environmental Coalition on Standards. So first of all, we agree to get the standards right and more harmonized and get these things correctly are, of primary importance. So just to agree on that. Secondly, on I guess the main topic of this session on zero emission buildings, At the moment, the discussion on kind of efficiency is obviously extremely important for energy savings, to decarbonize the grid and decarbonize the buildings. But the way that the criteria was agreed late last month by the council includes the possibility to use energy carriers that are in no way compatible with our climate goals long term. So, I mean, a question for the Commission and maybe for Angie as well, potentially, how do we regain the climate credibility of the idea of zero emission buildings? Because there is no way that is credible long term. So any response welcome.
Okay.
Two things. First, in France, I will take the French example. We have this cap on the carbon emission of the buildings. So at the end, you have to design a building, whatever the energy vector that you use, that has to be below that. So do it whatever the way you want. It's not the purpose of the regulation to put to ban or this on this vector, but in fact, what happens in the regulation in France is that for single family houses, you can forget about the boilers. So without banning the boiler itself, you reach the same result by putting this limit on the carbon emission of the building. So it works rather fine. So here we are talking about new buildings. And then it has to be implemented so I was talking about single family houses. We have a next step for collective dwellings with new thresholds in 2025, I think, which is already in the law. And at the end, it will end up also with more or less the same result. You will need a heat pump or hybrid heat pumps, basically. So the road there is rather okay. I'm talking about France. For existing building, the subject is really different. It's really different because you meet technical difficulties in various situations. And the most difficult situation, as I mentioned, the ban on fossil gas boiler, will be individual boiler in collective dwellings. So for this solution, and I know that there are different points of view, but to date, I never saw a solution that can be scaled up at the level of the entire continent. So mainly heat pump replacing individual boilers in collective dwellings. Honestly, I don't believe in it. There will be in some cases, that's not the issue, but massively for the tens of millions of dwellings there, I don't believe in that. And therefore, we have also another issue to decarbonize the energy vector, which is gas, and which will remain because of the winter peak. You won't scale size an electrical system for the winter peak for whole Europe. At some point, it doesn't make sense. And you need to decarbonize the gas vector. And this is why also we consider that the pushing for biogas that will replace the fossil gas is also an important part of the equation.
Okay, so we can take two more questions. I have also one question for the two ladies representing very important institutions today at our summit.
I have just a remark and a question for the two last speakers. The remark consists in about the regulation, French regulation. We are speaking about the all primary energy, but I think that's also important for all people that not knowing that we are only speaking about 5 uses when we are speaking about the French regulation of buildings. And about the electricity, that means we are speaking about domestic hot water, we are speaking about heating, we are speaking about ventilation and pumps and air conditioning and lighting. And that means about electricity, we are not speaking about mainly 60–70% of the real consumption in the real life. And this is one aspect that the French regulation is not taking into account, and maybe that's something should be taken into account for the future. My question is more about the databases for LCA, because you mentioned that it's easy to make a LCA for a new building. And my practical point of view is an experience and also a professional network is that's not easy at all, because already no database is clearly defined. The database is the one with FDES in France, so that means the CSTB put a check. And in fact, we have a real problem in France now to have a huge database. And there are different databases in Europe. And in fact, this practical aspect is a problem now, currently in France. So maybe in 2 years or 3 years, I hope it will be solved. But maybe this is something we should notice in Europe, because the EPBD is going in that sense. Which database should we use? Should be European database, French database, because we are for once in advance, I don't know. And I would be also interested in the German database for DGNB. What is used, Databau or EcoInvent, or I don't know why, but we didn't discuss at all about the database, and I think that's could be a great aspect for European and REHVA filling.
Once again, no. So it was a question launched. So who do you want to answer? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, generally on data, I'll get to that point. On the data, I think there's obviously a lot of discussion around a databases. I mean, personally, I feel that we need to start at building level and have data readily available for all types of stakeholders, including heating and cooling engineers, but also policymakers, financing institutions. And how do you do that? Because if you cannot actually, if a database cannot cater for all stakeholders involved, you will never get a whole life carbon approach, because you're not just not covering the whole life cycle. So basically you're creating data silos. So in response, so I've been working with UNEP and the Global Alliance for Buildings and Construction, but also with DG Growth of the Commission on development of building passports. And there are a couple of building passports initiatives in Europe. Some of them are policy-led, some of them are industry-led. But I think that would be, then you can then have aggregated data, of course, going into various databases. But I think what is really missing, and this has come from conversation with a lot of stakeholders, especially from the financial sector, is basically having a one-stop shop for data. And if you look at cars, if you look at your own kind of health insurance record, it looks at you holistically. It doesn't look at just one part of the bill of your performance or the car's performance. I know it's a very simplistic picture. So what I'd really like the Commission to do is to really progress on the development and Europe-wide adoption of building passports. Then you can actually the information that is contained in there can be drawn from other databases and can be drawn from other tools such as the EPC, so from certification, and from financial sources, and that then you have a holistic picture. You can also that would also help from a DGNB point of view. It would also help with the development of those climate action roadmaps, because you can actually draw on building data that may even predate your starting point, because you have also data from the planning processes and so forth. So that would be my take on how to deal with data. But progress is painfully slow, on this, sadly. I hope that was okay. I didn't quite answer your question, but I think we need to get away from these silo databases, because ideally we should facilitate all stakeholders to be able to be part in that process, and not just one profession. So sorry.
Okay. The question in the back of the room, yeah.
Yes, good morning, Philip Garrick from GRDF. I have a question. We mentioned efficiency, but in the energy efficiency directive, there is a strong push for demand-side flexibility. We would have thought that buildings will be the ideal candidate for that, because it represents a large volume, but even more for its seasonal demand. It's the only sector with such a seasonal demand due to heating. But presently, it's not very seen in. Can you hear me now? Oh, sorry. Yeah. So this flexibility in buildings is not very seeable in EPBD. When flexibility can help improve the path, because you can use the most efficient system, reduce the CO2 efficiency, improve the LCA because you can optimize with sober investments. The question is it too late to try to put a bit more focus on flexibility in buildings?
Yes. Yeah, I will reply to your question.
Yeah, flexibility in buildings, it's only included in the smart readiness indicator currently. And this is true that EPBD has historically operated with energy performance, and there is energy performance indicator only. There is no peak power indicators, never been in EPBD. However, yes, we as professionals have a couple of times proposed that there should be a peak power electricity indicator or something to be included, what is technically not too difficult, but currently flexibility is quite well addressed in the smart readiness indicator and this assessment scheme. However, this is not a performance-based scheme, it's based on the scoring from the catalog of installed systems in the building and the properties, but this is the only connection to the flexibility we have in EPBD currently.
Yeah, I would just like to what Jarek said, that flexibility in building design should be in the hand of the designer to choose to use, for instance, heat storage to lower the peak and so on. That can be on the building side design. The main point is the integration with the local energy, let's say, side. That means not only smart grid, but also can be local district heating, sharing of. This has been addressed by the directive, taking consideration energy communities and mainly renewable energy communities. They can share energies according to their profile, and that's flexibility. But then we need to develop such energy communities and to have such overall design of an energy site. That's the point. At the building level, it's free. Anyone can do. Any good designer can choose to have a storage. Of course, the storage is a cost. Then it's a matter of what's the tariff, if you are able or not to do that.
Thank you, Olivia, for your answer. We have a comment also from the DGNR.
Yes, thank you. So just to react on a number of points, I think there were several that connected to what is now in negotiation, and that I would say is definitely not too late. As I mentioned, now with the slightly delayed calendar in the parliament side, it's really now and probably until beginning of next year that the compromise amendments of the parliament are in the making. So it's really the right moment now. And then a number of other comments related more to, okay, how to put this in practice afterwards. So regarding those on points under negotiation, so there was a comment really on the weakening of zero emission buildings that we have in the Council General Approach adopted on the 25th of October. And there, I mean, for those of you who have not had the chance to have a look at this document, I would really encourage you to look at it, to see what has been really weakened there and what could be, you know, the points of attention now towards Parliament. And I would mention really two. One was already flagged by ECOS, and I hinted at it, but very briefly during my presentation, is on zero emission buildings. So there, what we have now in the general approach is definitely weaker than was in the Commission proposal. So there could be, let's say, two ways forward. I could imagine one would be that then through the Parliament position and in the subsequent trialogues, this is reinforced again, at least to some extent, or alternatively, that then is more adequately framed as what it is now, which is an on-site zero emission building definition, much more than a broader, zero emission buildings vision. So those could be a bit, two possible avenues, which would mean if we take the second, that then a revision in not too many years would need to look at this again, and possibly reinforce it further. But our aim with this revision being so comprehensive was to avoid, a revision in just a couple of years' time, because that, of course, every time puts on hold implementation, as I was mentioning. So that does regards zero emission buildings, but another aspect which is also slightly weakened in the Council general approach has to do with indoor air quality. So that is also something that I think is very relevant. And there, regarding indicators, in the EPC, we have the mandatory ones, which are on primary energy, but also on greenhouse gas emissions, but there could be also additional voluntary indicators, and there is a push for that in the current revision. And this again could look into indoor air quality in quite some more detail. Regarding the point on demand side flexibility, I would say that in the current directive, indeed, is the smart readiness indicator the main hook. But in the revision, we also have this reference to smart charging for e-mobility that also goes in the direction of demand response and demand side flexibility. And here as well, there is, of course, the parallel work on market design that is going on, where there could be new proposals also to address some of the emergency concerns that come with the high energy prices. But from a buildings perspective, a very basic barrier is the rollout of smart meters at national level. So this, in fact, is already in existing EU legislation, but is not happening everywhere. And it's something that is quite a precondition also for buildings to be much more active actors on demand side flexibility. And then there is as well a very important link to heat loads in buildings. So it's not only electricity, of course, but that may be also an area possibly for this afternoon discussion. And then without really going through all the comments, which were quite interesting, just to mention that, of course, once the text is agreed sometime in the second quarter of next year, then all the other work starts. So the update of the standards to reflect what is there in the actual text, then also guidance for transposition and implementation. So many of the other questions, let's say, which had to do more with the practical implications could be dealt with then. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for your answers to the questions.
So I represent ECOS, the European Coalition on Standards. For those of you who aren't, the Environmental Coalition on Standards, apologies, even I get confused. For those who aren't aware of ECOS, we were established 20 years ago to ensure an environmental voice in the standardizations process, in the setting standards, be they at, in particular, European and international level. For those of you who follow the standardizations process in SEN, you know, you can understand that sometimes it's dominated a lot by incumbent operators, and we're there to make sure the environmental perspective is heard. I joined ECOS 6 months ago, leading our work on buildings and industry. And I think also relevant for the few remarks I'll make today, I have a second role on the Climate Change Advisory Council in Ireland, which is the body established to advise the government on climate policy. And like anyone advising national governments on climate policy today, that understandably means discussing a lot energy policy, energy security, and how Ireland can continue to heat its homes in the years ahead in a situation where fossil gas is becoming increasingly scarce, increasingly expensive, and increasingly untenable in its use in the context of our growing climate crisis. So I've been asked today to speak on how to reduce demand reduction in the building sector, covering both residential and commercial. I think a few figures stick out as quite relevant in this. 40% of buildings are connected to gas, and many member states are continuing to connect, including my own in Ireland, are continuing to connect new buildings to fossil gas, despite the enormous problems that presents in terms of energy security and financial security for homes. At 40%, the residential sector is the largest source of gas consumption in Europe, even larger than industry. Though we know there are many more technologies available to remove gas from heating in residential sectors than there are in heat, but I'll come on to that in some of my remarks shortly. It's no surprise then that the International Energy Agency has called for a ban on fossil boilers in 2025. I was discussing this with a colleague and he disagreed slightly with how I presented this, but I think Europe has gotten lucky this winter in the temperatures we've had and our capacity to fill up our gas storage before Russia started cutting off its gas over the course of the summer. But ultimately the system we've been using to keep people warm for decades now needs to be fundamentally changed. It's not a case of taking out one input and replacing it over a long period. 20-year renovations, marginally more efficient technologies. There needs to be a fundamental change to how we heat our buildings in Europe. And that includes at all levels, the energy system we operate in Europe, the building system, how we build, what we build with, and the product level, the products we're putting into buildings to keep them warm and keep them cool. For all this to be achieved, we need to make sure that the European and national policies are closely aligned, provide clarity to industry and individuals and consumers and households, and that the ambition is scaled up higher than it currently is. So as I said, it requires a combination of European level and national level policies. So what do they look like? At a European level, we have two big tools we can be using to drive down gas demand in the building sector. The first is the eco-design tool, and the second is the Energy Performance Buildings Directive. Eco-design has been proven to be an incredibly effective tool at European level to increase efficiency and to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels for a whole range of products. And it's why the EU is in the process of expanding that eco-design tool to much further parts of our economy, including textiles and different industrial products. We're working very closely with eco-design, and we think the best use it can be put to is ultimately to phase out the use of standalone fossil fuel boilers. And I know this topic was raised in one of the earlier sessions as to how we can phase these out and whether that's possible. The EU is aiming for a 2029 phase out, where we have combined with a number of other actors in the sector, heat pump manufacturers, electricity providers for a much earlier phase out than 2029. And we think we can reduce fossil fuel gas consumption by 8% by having an earlier phase out of standalone boilers. And I think it's important to understand why we want to do that and what is the level of ambition. It's not just standalone boilers for individual homes, but needs to be standalone boilers for large buildings as well, apartment blocks, commercial buildings. We need to understand that when there's a choice between direct electrification or continuing down with routes such as biogas or hydrogen, that for a whole range of reasons, the direct electrification is the much more correct choice, even if it represents a much bigger system change to how we're currently heating our buildings. And I was struck recently by one paper I read, which found that in the industrial sector, where temperatures needed are sometimes 14 or 1500 degrees Celsius, we have or are close to having the technologies available to directly electrify industrial heat. So we have the technologies to directly electrify industrial heat, which is huge scale of heat requirements. We undoubtedly have the capacity to directly electrify home heating and commercial heating and residential and large residential. And I think we need to be clear on the various vulnerabilities we'll give to households and businesses if we go down the path of biogas and hydrogen. For biogas, we're all aware of the huge competition it can present with food and agricultural systems. But we should also be aware of the vulnerabilities it presents to households and businesses. Biogas is either imported or can be imported, which leaves us once again at the vulnerability of developments outside of Europe, or it is produced from the agricultural sector, which itself is vulnerable to climate change developments. So it doesn't make sense to continue to leave us vulnerable to the fluctuating prices that would come with a reliance on biogas, even if it was a good idea to go on the biogas route, which it isn't. On the hydrogen side, we know there is huge cost implications from going down the path of hydrogen, incredible inefficiencies, and huge issues around storage and transportation. Any leakage of hydrogen acts as a greenhouse gas, combines with methane, and worsens our climate problem. So we talk about technological neutrality, and I think that sometimes that's used as a means of defending the status quo and lowering ambition. Technology neutrality has a role to play, but when there's such a clear case for direct electrification, we should take that path of direct electrification and leave behind those who are trying to maintain the status quo in their existing models with an excess reliance on biogas and hydrogen. So that's the eco-design revision. We're hopeful that EU can match that level of ambition and go further. On an energy performance buildings directive, we do have a serious problem of ambition when it comes to what member states think is the correct reaction. Last December, the European Commission published a revision of the energy performance of buildings directive, calling for ambitious renovation standards for buildings across the continent to try and phase out the most inefficient buildings by the end of this decade. Member states took a look at that idea and rejected it. Their view was that, well, these are individual homes, these individual buildings. Who are we to tell homeowners that they have to renovate the most inefficient buildings? I think that's a very narrow approach to the problem. I think anyone who's owning the most inefficient buildings, be they residential or commercial, are putting an enormous cost on our societies, be they a cost of energy security or a cost of climate policy. I don't think it's acceptable that in the 2020s, anyone has the right to own an F or G rated building. You may have the financial means to heat it yourself. You may be indifferent to the cost of the tenant who rents that building. But ultimately, 7 years after the Paris Agreement has been signed, the year Russia has invaded and upended our energy system, we need to make it very clear that the era of low energy efficiency buildings has to rapidly come to an end. And member states need to put in place support measures for those renovations and also penalties for homeowners. It's not acceptable when we've got so many households and businesses across Europe vulnerable to rising costs of heating, that member states have sided essentially with landlords and people who are sitting on energy efficient buildings. And that's the path they've chosen. Likewise, we've seen some other worrying developments in member states. And one example of this is the definition of zero emission buildings. I think when it comes to the sort of systems change we need, the manufacturers, businesses, anyone active in the space would benefit from greater clarity as to what a zero emission building is. And simply moving the emissions from offsite, perhaps offsite to the generation of the use of biofuels, the use of gas and district heating, we need a much clearer definition of zero emission buildings so that zero means zero, be it on-site heat generation or off-site heat generation. And we need the target for zero emission buildings to come in much earlier than 2030. We can't afford to wait 8 more years for that definition to be imposed. And then finally, on whole life carbon, we need to broaden this concept of a zero emission building to not just be the operational, but also the embodied carbon as well, because we know the production of cement and steel has huge climate implications for Europe, climate and energy security implications. So these are the tools we need at European level. It's the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, it's the eco-design. These have been proven to be effective in the past. They need to have their ambition increased. But European policies can only get us so far. We need governments at national level to complement ambitious EU measures through effective strategies at national level. The situation in Ireland is sobering. Irish homes emit almost 60% more CO2 than average homes in Europe. If you've ever had to rent or live in a house in Ireland, you'll know why. The renovation rates are low. The building standards for many of the buildings built in the first decade of this century were extremely low. The government now has an ambitious target for the end of this decade of installing 60,000 heat pumps by 2030. It's a huge number, 400,000 in existing buildings. It's a huge share of the Irish building stock, requiring many families to change how they heat their homes. Despite this huge target in Ireland, we have public utilities which are going effectively the other direction. We have our Gas Networks Ireland operators of the gas grid connecting 8,000 more homes to the gas grid in 2021. We've installed that, and that actually exceeds the number of heat pumps installed in Ireland last year. So we're actually connecting more homes to the gas grid than we are installing heat pumps. And that shows that it's not enough just to support the new technology. You also need a huge systems change going into governance, going into your public utilities, going into your building standards, and providing the sort of clear prohibitions on new gas hookups, reforming your state agencies, setting clear end dates. Because as I said, 7 years after Paris, the year when Russian gas has been turned off to Europe, it's not acceptable for a public utility to continue to connect homes to the gas grid. And of course, to complement this upgrading of heat pumps and renovation, we need a huge change in retraining and skills. But when it comes to that issue of skills, material, governments need to support it, but they also need to support it with very clear objectives and rules so that everyone in the sector knows what's coming down the tracks. So to conclude, we have a clear pathway. We know we can heat buildings using electricity, direct electrification. We know it has huge benefits in terms of energy security, in terms of financial security. We know those benefits exceed trying to heat homes through biogas and hydrogen, and certainly fossil gas. We have the tools, we have the targets. What we need is for governments, be they acting in their capitals or when they are coming to Brussels or Strasbourg to legislate, to substantially increase their ambition. So this is the ECOS perspective on it. It's my perspective as somebody active at national level and worrying about Ireland's energy security as our domestic gas supplies are wound down. My colleagues Mike and Marco are here as well today, and they're also active on these files as well. Mike on EPPD and Marco somewhere in the room, I think, on the ECOS design. So feel free to come up and talk to us more during the coffee break. Thank you.
Thank you. And just a moment, Andrew, we will take also perhaps a couple of questions because we do not have any specific QA session. So any questions or comments to Andrew? Yes, please. I think, yeah, we need to use a microphone.
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks. My name is Pedro Diaz from Solid Europe. I'm a bit disappointed that you didn't refer renewable heat once. And I'm also would like to understand what you mean by direct electrification, because the way I understand direct electrification for heating in particular is any form of heat coming from electricity, including those that we see more present in the market, which are very cheap to buy, but extremely expensive to operate, from wall-mounted radiators to infrared heat solutions and so on. So, but I assume that's not what you mean by direct electrification, but I would like to clarify if possible.
Yeah, sure. In terms of direct electrification, the most credible mechanism today is heat pumps because of the physics of taking the existing heat in the atmosphere rather than trying to generate it from, as you say, electric space heaters, which can be proven incredibly ineffective. Yes, I am skeptical of renewable heat because I've looked at some of the sourcing in terms of biofuels and the various issues with those. And I think we shouldn't look at this as just trying to solve the problem of climate. but also trying to solve the problem of climate and biodiversity. And the issue we always run up to when it comes to bioenergy is we're asking land to do a lot, not just solve climate change, but also protect biodiversity. And this year, I think the event was moved to Canada, but we're in the process of developing a Paris-style agreement for biodiversity. And one of the commitments many European governments have made is to set aside more of their land for purposes of biodiversity. So kind of leaving it off the grid for bioenergy development. And the only way bioenergy development has worked in Europe in the last 10 or 15 years is through increased agricultural intensification. And that increased agricultural intensification has had a very negative impact on biodiversity. So if there may be some case for bioenergy in very limited sectors, such as aviation or shipping, where direct electrification is proving a bit more challenging. But fundamentally, if you think you can directly electrify through heat pumps, then you should go for that, because the expectation that the land can do all this around bioenergy, I don't think is tenable if you combine the climate and biodiversity crises.
Okay, thank you very much. There is one more question. Yes, I myself need to run.
Thank you for your presentation. My name is Oliver Jung. I work for GCP Europe, which is the European Association of Mechanical Contractors, Building Service Engineers, Plumbers, and HVAC installers. And I hear your high level of ambition concerning the transition towards electrification. What are your views concerning the skills that would be needed in order to get to the implementation, the actual implementation of such level of ambition, and what specific claims or requests do you have to policymakers with that regard? Thank you.
I think in this regard, one of the best decisions made by the Irish government was to create a ministry for education beyond high school, and for that ministry to focus not just on university education, but skills training, and opening a series of skills training centers around Ireland for exactly this purpose. I think for whole aspects of the green economy, not just heating, there needs to be a much bigger focus on developing the new skills among workers, retraining people. And you know, my own experience working with some of these sectors in the Irish building sector is that they are open to this more so than I think other parts of the Irish economy. I think they recognize that in 5 or 10 years time, or sooner, I would hope, it's not going to be possible to install new gas boilers. So I think there is, you know, from my own interaction, there is a genuine openness to this. But I think setting up those skills centers, and also just making sure there's clarity, so people know when those bans are going to come in, so they know what kind of regulatory framework they're working with. I think those are the best kind of steps national governments can take.
Well, thank you very much, Andrew. And now we really need to proceed to our next speaker. So Philippe Rivière is the next one. Speaking about the eco-design and coming from the DG Energy. So please, the floor is yours.
Yep. Can you hear me now? It's okay? Yeah. Okay. So, yeah. This one is exactly. So good afternoon, my name is Philippe Rivière. I'm working with the European Commission in the same unit as Paula Garcia this morning. It's a unit that takes care of the energy efficiency of buildings and products, and I'm in the product team. And in the product team, we are dealing with European regulation to improve the energy efficiency of two types, which were introduced by Andrew before. So the eco-design regulation and the energy labeling regulation, and I will explain how it works. And in particular, in this presentation, I will talk about heating and also other HVAC products. Yes. This is the stage. Yeah. So eco-design regulation are what is called generally standards and energy labeling labels. So standards labels program elsewhere in the world. So how it works, to push the efficiency we put minimum requirements on the lowest efficient product on the market. And it goes in combination with a label that shows to the end users the information on the relative efficiency between the worst and the best product. And this combination of the two effects allows to transform the market and to steer to the most efficient product. And so that's what we are talking about. And this already exists for some time, and there are clear benefits that we have evaluated and that are not always well known. So it's it's very important, about 1,000 terawatt-hour primary energy in 2020, and it is just increasing because of the renewing of the stock of products. And in this, all these savings, of course, a very large, very important part is in the heating and HVAC in general, but most particularly in the heating of heating appliances, and mostly used in buildings. So as per 2020, it's already about 7% of the EU primary energy consumption that has been saved, with an impressive amount of CO2 equivalent savings and also economical savings per household. So this is the past. This is the regulation we have already implemented in the past. So for instance, for heating, for the sector of boilers and water heating, the last regulation was implemented in 2013 and have still effects today. So if we look at this regulation, so the main one is for hydronic systems. So this covers about 45% of EU buildings. And we are talking about mainly boilers and a small part of heat pumps. Solid fuel boilers are in another regulation. And we have also a couple of regulations on local space heater that would be typically electric heating, but also wood stoves. And I will speak more particularly of these two regulations because they are being revised, and we are presently discussing what could be the new label and what could be the new minimum performance requirements for these products. So if we start with the local room heating, we have made the easy part, I would say. In the past, we had basically 5 scales, meaning that we had almost a scale per product. So every type of industry was allowed to improve its products to the top level. But now if we want to have further savings, we need to combine all this on a single scale to be able to compare the energy efficiency of worst energy products, most efficient energy products, and best energy efficient energy products. So in that sequence, you can see that you have on the right side the heat pumps. All is this in its primary energy efficiency, with the sense of the EED that we discussed this morning. So because of the fact that heat pumps are mobilizing ambient energy, they are much more efficient in total. And this is for a primary energy efficiency factor of 2.1. That is what is presently in the EED. So the heat pumps are in total much more efficient, while electric heating would be at the bottom, and combustion appliances would be under 100%. So if we combine all this on a single scale, we know that there are some people looking at choosing among these different systems, and so we can have much higher savings when there is a substitution. Doesn't mean that all products will be substituted, doesn't mean that it's forbidden to use wood, but there are savings in the substitution more than in increasing each product by its own. If we look at hydronic space heaters, so we can first take a look at on the left. That's the scale translated with the new primary energy, primary energy factor. That's the scale that is presently in force today. And here you have an idea of the distribution of products. Huh? So you can see that this big pack yellow is the condensing boiler. And in fact, the previous regulation, the main objective of the previous regulation was to shift from non-condensing to condensing boilers. And you can see the results on the side that was very efficient. And this was done through minimum performance requirements. But the thing is that now the policy objective have changed. We are moving to the Fit for 55, and clearly we cannot keep this large part of gas boiler on the market and in the stock. We have to shift to more efficient solution. That could be hybrid solution, that could be heat pumps, that could be cogeneration, but it has to be more efficient, or we will not make the objective that we have for 2030. So the next target is in fact to remove condensing boilers, the same boiler that we have pushed on the market for the last 10 years. That's the way it is. And so what we are discussing now is a mandatory rescaling. I say mandatory because we have to do it anyway, but the rescaling would be to put the A to the level of the F, and so close to the bottom of the scale. Of course, it has been discussed for quite a while. We have opened the discussion in 2017, so it's not easy to be done. In the present context, it might evolve a bit faster, maybe. And we also have to reorientate the subsidies. So this morning in the PPD presentation, it has been said that we had to stop subsidizing fossil fuels. In fact, there is an article in the labeling regulation that already says that subsidies by member states should be reserved to the top classes, the most significantly populated classes at the top. And so we have to implement this more strongly in the coming years to push heat pumps and other more efficient products. But we had already a scale in place comparing different products, and this label has not allowed to have heat pumps on the market. So we were missing some other conditions to push the transformation to more efficient products. And one important point is the installers. For these specific space heaters, we know that the opinion of the installer and the advice of the installer is crucial for the end user. We need, of course, to have the economical conditions in place. It means to correct the gas and electricity ratio, to include the carbon price in the electricity prices, and also, at least temporarily, to develop targeted subsidy or loan schemes for more efficient appliances. And also, we need to try to avoid any distortion of the functioning of the internal market, because in our opinion, it's the best way that we have to steer the heat pump costs down. And so it means that we have to avoid any particular national schemes that would regard additional testing, additional barriers that would limit the functioning of the internal markets. And it also means that we have to look closely on how the different member states will choose to decarbonize their buildings, and in particular, how they will use the new provisions that are being inserted in the EPBD on the possible ban or limitation of heating systems in Article 11. And so this is the last point, and probably a very important point. This is the fact that for a few months now, we have a provision in the REPowerEU communication that proposed to the Commission to test the hypothesis of putting a horizontal minimum energy performance system, so MEPS, at 110%, meaning that it would ban standalone boilers for a date, so a second year in the future in the regulation. So nowadays we are in the process, the legislative process. We have an impact assessment that we are validating internally, and to say if it's possible or not, and then we will go back to stakeholders to discuss if it's possible, how it can be implemented. But anyway, these are complex regulations, so we will need more consultation in the beginning of next year, most likely, both on space heaters and also probably on local space heaters. So Thank you very much. If you have any question.
Well, thank you. So there is a time for a couple of questions. So yes, Pedro, please start. Maybe I can start. There was this micro CHP in some slides and at quite high level efficiency. So what's the fuel for this one? Is it hydrogen, or how it is calculated, or is it operated with a natural gas, this type of appliances?
Yes, it is operated with natural gas. In fact, what we have on the market would probably be less efficient because this is a combination of a gas boiler and a micro CHP. But if you, these are the figures for the micro CHP alone, and it can be very efficient. So then it's also a design of how the product is put on the market.
But then additional question, if it is operated with natural gas, when it is a fossil fuel and it will be banned by EPBD from new buildings. So in the efficiency scale, it can be quite high still, but maybe you want to comment also this.
So we are working with the internal markets regulation. So the energy is a shared competence with the member states. We cannot regulate the fuels, so we just regulate the product efficiency. And so it's complementary in a way, but we cannot say that products that use this type of fuel cannot be on the market. That cannot work.
Okay, then Pedro,
please. That's simple. Is which factor do you compare for when you compare gas, natural gas and electricity? Which factor do you use? Are fixed or?
Yeah, it's a fixed factor. For now, in the present regulation, it's 2.5. It was proposed to be 2.1. In fact, we follow what is in the EED. Yeah? So it's 2.1 in the EED, and they are moving to 1.9. So we could end up with 1.9. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And one more for Livia.
You said before efficiency, which is here. Okay, you said before that you compare in based on the technical efficiency of each kind of equipment you are taking into consideration, but efficiency is based on energy, not on primary energy. If you're using primary energy, of course, will depend on the conversion factor. And still on the conversion factor, there is no convergency among Europe. We have different conversion factor in each country. Then the labeling doesn't work because what have you used then as conversion factor? The Italian is different than the French one, is different than the Finnish one.
So EU policies are based on the average. That's what we do, and we use for that Eurostat value to determine average primary energy factor to convert electricity final energy in primary energy equivalents with a lot of conventions indeed. But
sometimes energy price is very good factor to be used, but yes, Philip, thanks a lot for this presentation, and I think we need to move on. So our final presentation before the panel will be by Tomasz Kolewa, and he is coming from Poland and will speak about deep energy renovation. Tomasz also chaired the task force preparing a guidebook on this topic, so please go on.
Thank you, Jarek. So my name is Tomasz Kolewa, and I come here from Poland, and where I work at the Lublin University of Technology. I am also a professional engineer in frame of designing and supervising on a building site, so I have also a really technical background regarding engineering duties in a building site. So we all know that European Commission communicated about Green Deal, renovation wave, repower. We know that almost all building will be also, which exists today, will be also in 2050. So we should somehow decarbonize this amount of buildings. And we also notice that there are some barriers. So we do not know what kind of benefits we should expect from renovation. There is also lack of trust in actual energy savings in renovation. And also there is lack of technical and clear and cost-effective concept to how to decarbonize the buildings. Okay, so we also know that we should include as much aspects as possible to properly move to the carbon neutral buildings. I think that energy renovation of building envelope is quite well known for us. However, how to renovate a HVAC system is also quite clear for engineers. But we also should include education of users. Yes, we should include users in the process of energy management in buildings. And after, when we decrease the energy consumption, we should use renewable energy sources, yes, somehow. So I noticed, especially in Poland, that we largely focus on building envelope energy renovation. However, how to modernize the existing heating system and how this kind of modernization, energy modernization, influence the final energy consumption is not well known, and it could be somehow reached from the field measurements which we already made and presented in frame of this guidebook. So we proposed the first step to how to decrease the energy consumption in existing buildings, because we know that in new buildings you can make a lot of things, but in an existing building it is quite challenging aspects. So in the frame of this guidebook, which is a consensus, somehow consensus guidelines among different members, yes, prepared by different members from different countries. It was around 10 countries, also from, it was Nordic countries from South, so it is quite consensus issue. And we addressed all HVAC systems which are present in the buildings, how to decrease the energy consumption in specific systems. So we address ventilation, we address heating sources, we address heating system, domestic hot water, and also cooling. And also underlined how education influences this process and how it should be included in this process. So the step one, which is described in details in this guidebook, is how to decrease the final energy consumption in the buildings, taking into account the best available solutions, how to minimize the payback time of proposed solutions, and how to minimize the realization time, because it is really important that the measures, the energy efficient measures which you propose in the buildings should be realized as quick as possible. Sorry. So taking into account, we can have some kind of strategies, but also we should, especially in existing buildings, we should also take into account the needs of building managers and building owners. So this, what we propose, should be easy implemented within existing buildings and taking into account existing HVAC system in order to maybe save some of them. Do not change everything, yes. So also we should propose measures which are characterized by short implementation time, short payback time, and if possible, our solutions should be easy replicable in another buildings similars, because then another buildings manager may decide quite fast how to apply such a system. It will be such a pilot cases. Yes, it will be also good practice. So in frame of this guidebook and our activities, we proposed and show approach, holistic approach, which can be applied in this case in existing buildings. We also demonstrated this based on a long-term case studies, which is a very valid issue, yes, because in frame of simulations you can prove something, yes, but take into account results from long-term field measurements, long-term field studies. It is quite very, very important issue. And also we know that in different countries you can have different renovation concepts. So that's why what we presented there is of general issue. So you can apply such a measures in different renovation concepts. So it is also quite important. So second step, now when we have and when we propose how to decrease the final energy consumption, will be how to move to renewable energy sources, and also different aspects will be here addressed, because we establish also the international team. Task force members are from different countries, and these are 14 experts with different background. So not only HVA system professionals, but also experts from renewable energy sources, from indoor environment quality, indoor air quality, and also education of users. So it will be also quite good consensus reports which we will prepare. So the planet outcomes is the first outcome will be the short report on how to move from natural gas to heat pumps, district heating, and hybrid solution especially in existing buildings. And also we plan different other reports which will address the needs of HVAC system professionals. And at the end, we plan a guidebook, which will be a consensus guidelines, but it is a future, yes, and we plan at the end of 2024. Regarding the first report, what may be also interesting for you, because it is quite hot topic now, we plan to, besides some to first section of introduction, we plan to present the overview of existing heating system and hot water, so HVAC system, which are supplied by a gas. And after we provide what kind of possibilities are to replace the gas in existing buildings. By this process, we also underline very important needs to really adduce the new sources to existing system. So we also tackled the power of new heat sources, how to lower the supply temperature of the heating medium, how to use the weather-based or forecast control of such a system in order to increase by this energy efficiency, and also how to limit heat uses in frame of heating and domestic hot water system. And this will be presented also supported by specific schemas, which will be clear and I think helpful for practitioners such as designers of such a system, so of such a modernization in existing buildings. So concluding, I think that we should, as much as possible, influence important stakeholders that they should underline our role in this process, yes, because you know that energy used in buildings is used by HVAC system mainly. So that's why it is our role how to decrease the energy consumption. So the step one, it was regarding energy efficient renovation of existing buildings, should be made, in our opinion, as a first one in order to properly decarbonize the building. And after use naturally specific renewable energy sources which are technically and economically supported in a specific location of a building according to specific local policies. So, and the last point is that we will try to assist our colleagues from HVAC system professionals in this process, so the process of decarbonization of existing buildings. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Thomas. Any fast questions to Thomas? Yes, yeah, please.
Thank you, Thomas. I always am oversensitive for a statement like short payback time, because we all know, well, first the question is what is short, but we all know that if you pick those short payback time measures, you will block the next measures, because the next measures will be, of course, more expensive in your economic calculations. So is it not better to oblige to make a total renovation plan towards zero carbon? And okay, you have to rank all measures and there are prices, but then you are sure that you inform your client that it is not well, something you can pick your nice fruits out. You have to do them all.
Okay, thank you for this question. It is quite challenging, yes, when you combine different renovation measures, what will be the latest energy savings level, and taking this into account, what will be the payback time of the full renovation. But in order, like I said before, to adjust to different renovation concepts which are valid in specific countries, because it's not one general renovation concepts, because we have some kind of subsidies in different countries. We developed and presented different measures specified by different payback times dedicated to the specific measures. Naturally, we proposed what should be done in what is recommended to be done in specific buildings. Yes, so naturally the payback time, it is good and is below 5 years. Yes, in most of our measures which we propose in this guidebook is below 5 years.
Yeah, this is indeed very short, but maybe energy prices can play some role also in these short payback times. But yes, what Jaap was pointing out, I think this is called like renovation passport in the EPBD, and this is also important topic. But yes, maybe as a final question for you, these technical solutions, would they include anything else than the heat pumps, or is it everything being based on the heat pumps? So do you see some other possible technical solutions in addition to the heat pumps to be included in this guidance?
I think naturally, yes, because heat pumps is not everything. Yes, we have also boilers which are supplied by biomass, by biogas. We have also district heating system, which maybe, which for example in Poland is now developed a district heating system which is fully supplied from renewable energy sources. So when we have carbon neutral heat in a district heating system, so it is a future. Yes, we have 27 years to make this process.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much. And yes, we need to proceed to our distinguished panel discussion. So I am inviting the moderator, Anita, and all the distinguished panelists, Ilari Aho, Selin Kari, Thomas, yes, you can stay on the stage, Henk Raneberg, Philip Rivière, and Christian Schauer. So for the panelists, yes, please take a seat and do free to select it. And then, yes, Anita will take over. So
thank you
please
very
go
much.
on.
I need a strong neighbor. Oh, switch on. Thank you for the panelists. While you are sitting down, I am approaching and this side. There is no more room on the stage, so I will just be close to you. So I would like to welcome our panelists, expert panels. which is representatives of REHVA supporter companies and policymakers and yeah, experts in the field of design. We chose this title of the panel because we are here after COP27, first of all, with the highest ever number of fossil fuel lobbyists participating, as you might have heard. And we have, let's say, some controversial political ambitions, whether what is the goal regarding fast decarbonization or fossil fuel phase out in our buildings and heating and cooling systems. So I would like to discuss or focus this discussion on we have these ambitions and we all agree on that it must to be, we need to do it for our climate and for our future, but we have a very critical period as well regarding the latest energy crisis that we have. So that's why we invited our panelists with a short introduction so you can see the affiliations, but I go through them. Ilariaho, who is here also with different hats, hopefully in discussion, so representing Uponor, but also part of industry associations for heating and even active in the World Green Building Council. We have here Céline Carré, who represents here in this panel EuroAce and the Renovate Europe campaign via this association. Then Henk Kranenberg from Daikin, as a producer of a manufacturer and producer of solutions and equipment. Christian Schauer, who is the director of a knowledge center of Viega, covering the domestic hot water installation part of the discussion. And then you heard already the introduction to Philip from the DG Energy in charge of the eco design regulations and developments, and Tomáš Šoleva from our Building Decarbonization Task Force. So I would like to kindly ask you first as panelists to give some short reactions and statements on what you heard today, and in general on the general topic of how can we phase out fossil fuel from heating and cooling, and by the way, domestic hot water installations. Thank you. And we could maybe start just around like here. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Anita. There is a risk that this might end up not being a short statement, so just shut me up if I take too long on this topic. Before I say what I say, I would just like to point out that I'm personally a dedicated and devoted proponent of heat pumps. I spent most of the 90s and early 2000s helping to create the market for heat pumps in Finland. Now we are where we are. Having said that, first of all, you took the main punchline out of my message out in your introduction. It's not about can we phase out fossil fuels, we must phase out. Everybody agrees. The industry agrees, the building owners agree, everybody agrees. I'm personally a bit skeptical of a one solution route to phasing out fossil fuels. And the reason I'm skeptical is not because I wouldn't believe that the industry is perfectly capable of delivering enough heat pumps to service all of Europe and the world. I'm worried because I haven't seen a discussion on the impacts of that transition on the national and European grids and the capacity of the grids and the investment related to that. I haven't seen a discussion on how are we going to manage the completely different peak power demand to electrical energy consumption ratio over the year, which is going to make some of the production capacity of electricity highly uneconomical. What will the impact on the electricity price of that be? Maybe I'm just uneducated and I haven't seen the answers to this, but this is what I'm sort of worried about. One obvious thing, and this was touched, I think, by all the presentations already, this will not ever happen in a feasible way without dramatically investing in demand reduction at the same time. So we need to go back to the famous energy efficiency first principle before even worrying about where does the energy come from. There's no way of satisfying all the current and growing future demand just by renewables. We need to seriously limit the future demand as we go forward. And the third statement is all of this needs to happen in a socially acceptable manner, because we are already now, not only because of the energy crisis, but already earlier, we've been in a situation where not everyone is able to pay their heating bills, let alone pay the costs of improving the property that they live in. And the worst that this can lead to is civil unrest and you know, public opinion turning against all the things that we all know have to be done anyway.
Thank you very much, Henk. Hilary, very good start. So Henk, now it's up to you to keep
Okay,
up the
thank you
pace.
very much, Hilary. Thank you also very much, because it's, of course, a lot of these things in general sense, they are, I think everybody agrees to that. So that is not, there's not such a discussion item, I think. And for me, it's in fact a no-brainer that, that in fact we can, within the coming years, get rid of fossil fuels for heating. And on purpose, I don't mention cooling, because in fact, fossil fuels used for cooling is negligible. So this is an area that I think should be addressed differently. But can we achieve the REPower EU targets? I think that's another thing. And I think some items are already raised. And I think it depends on the number of things. That it's for me also a no-brainer that we can have a tremendous cutting in the CO2 emissions by adopting the REPower EU targets. And okay, probably a large part will be the heat pumps, as it's also specified in the program, but there are all kinds of other solutions as well. And I think this technological neutral approach is always very good. It's not about we have now a pie and let's try to get the biggest piece out of it. No, let's go for the sustainable environment. That is very clear. What worries me more is that we don't end up with penny-wise, pound-foolish solutions. That we start up with activities that are infringing with the targets we are setting, which are our long-term ambitions. And long-term, in fact, it's not even long-term, because then by 2030, if we want to deliver 30 million or 50 or 60 million heat pumps, just a few figures to show. It depends on what type of heat pumps you include and how it will be brought to the market. But that's a huge amount, and that is costing a huge effort from the complete sector, not only from the industry, but also all the installers, everybody who's involved in it, and also from the policy makers. And in that sense, I also like to refer to that part, because if I see what is going on in the legislative framework, that can cause roadblocks, and we should take care about it. Eco-design is one of them. We see that now the next steps are coming up, and this may facilitate further the implementation of heat pumps. But we should not forget that whatever we are doing on that in that field is also eating engineering capacity and time, and engineering capacity is limited. So we have to be very careful on, okay, what will be implemented by when? Is there sufficient introduction time? If we jeopardize the market by suddenly raising new requirements in a couple of years' time, then a lot of capacity has to go there, and that capacity will not go into production expansion. So all these kind of things will happen. And that is, of course, we don't talk about eco-design. It's the what is called the eco-design sustainable product regulation. I always have to read again what's the exact wording. But of course, this is bringing in a new dimension again on the digital passport. And how effective is it? Will it really contribute to our environment within the upcoming 5 to 10 years? So when is this all required? So this is what I mean with penny wise, pound foolish. What is really delivering the best results to the market? Another one, I think, is very an obvious one, is the current F-gas discussion going on. Yes, if we say, okay, now we cut F-gas, and from tomorrow onwards, it has, or tomorrow, then in 2-3 years' time, it shall not be any F-gases anymore. Forget then about the 30 million heat pumps. Perhaps we will not even achieve 10% out of that. So we have to be very careful on what is realistic, what is the time to market. Also, when politics comes with other regulations around, what is achievable. And of course, Some companies will say, yes, please come up, because for them it's a business case, it's a business opportunity. But it's not about the individual company. This is about our society and how can we achieve it as a group, as a total. This is not about a one-by-one company idea and best position they have. No, this is about how can we achieve this target. So then the F-gas can clearly infringe on that, including further on the life cycle assessment. Well, many things are going around there. We have some standards that are available now in the operational phase of the heat pump. If you have flammable refrigerants, like R32 is already full in use in the market. But what about the highly flammable refrigerants? And not just looking at operational side, but also at the logistics, at all the transportations around, at the demolition phase, taking them out of the market. So there are so many things that have to be solved together. So if we stop too quick, it may cut the targets to be achieved by the REPower EU. And another one I think is relevant is it's in fact also coming from eco-design. So sorry about that, Philip, but it's on the compensation test method that is proposed now, which is most likely getting into force on lot 1 for the smaller appliances. It means, okay, I will take care, I will not talk too long, sorry. But these are all factors that have an impact, but also looking at the route to market. It's the installers, the capable installation capacity that is relevant, where we have to take care. But also we have to look into, and it was referred to just in the presentation before, lock-in effects that may come up, not only from a technical side, but also from a legislative side. So I will not go into details because otherwise it would take far too much time. And I was a bit surprised also to see from Ireland the presentation before, okay, we are still using a lot of gas boilers, but we also see examples like what we saw in the Netherlands. By 2026, it's not allowed anymore to use standalone gas boilers. And if I hear all the discussion going around, I think, yes, why is it possible in some markets and why not in others? So why don't we line up these kind of activities to make sure that we are going to achieve the REPower EU sessions? So in fact, to wrap up, let's act pound-wise and not penny foolish.
Thank you. It was also a good last sentence for Céline. Yeah. How can we spread around at the European scale actually?
Yes.
The implementation of policies.
Thank you. Is that working? Yeah. Okay. Good. Thanks. So I'm here today with you, and thanks for having me on behalf of EROIS, Energy Efficient Buildings, that values 15 industrial members active in the energy efficiency field, so from the building envelope, systems and controls. So, and we typically articulate a common voice for energy efficient policies in buildings. So you were saying what drives you. So what drives us today is really energy efficiency first. I think that we have still quite a big chunk of work on our plate, because in spite of the geopolitics, in spite of the economics, we still have quite a tough battle, especially in the current negotiations on the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive. And that's quite striking that overall Europe, I think, has been spending since August 2021 around 4 or 5% of its GDP on subsidizing bills, so energy bills. At the same time, we find it harder to plan for structural measures to basically not have to do that anymore and not have to subsidize fossil fuels, basically. So that's it, quite tough. So we obviously, when you mention about how to speed up, how to decarbonize heat, how to accelerate, we in EROIS are also firm believer in policy and in regulatory requirements. It's not just because it's fun, it's because in the sector, in the construction sector, that's the only thing that actually works, because it's not something that people do by themselves. And they are not necessarily also equipped to, I mean, me as a homeowner or anyone is not necessarily equipped to understand what needs to be done. So that's important. And also all of the different actors, and that's a very scattered world, needs to get aligned on around something. So that's very important. It's important in our work, and we start with getting the big picture on new builds, but also on existing buildings. And that the topic, I mean, the elephant in the room is the topic of minimum energy performance standards, which as such is going to be a driver for all of our technologies. I mean, all of the technologies we represent in Euroways, both from the building envelope, insulation, windows, and including heat pumps, which was the question, is part of that. So the question on the ban on fossil fuels is definitely something that has to be part of our regulatory landscape. But then, as it was mentioned, the different starting points in Europe make it something that needs to be worked out in details for different segments and for different building types at the national level. And for that, I would mention also two tools that we have been working on for many years, and that still needs to be, let's say, leveraged in terms of their impact, which is those long-term renovation strategies. So now they're going to change name again, national building renovation plans. This is where that work has to happen, on which buildings to prioritize and what to do next. And still that work has to be much more granular and impactful. What's come back from those strategies is still too vague, does not enable our sector to plan ahead by, for example, on existing buildings, where and how many buildings to renovate in the next 5 or 10 years. It's still far too vague for the preparedness that our sector needs to go through, also for training people. So yeah, a big focus on those future national building renovation plans. And then, and I was glad it was mentioned, building renovation passports or individual renovation roadmap are very important, because this is where you get the buy-in of people. This is where they can plan ahead. This is where they can map out when they're going to change their heating systems, and in articulation with the buildings. And I think that is also something, it could sound a little bit administrative, but it is something that is an enabler for the people to get interest and to understand, and it can be simplified. We have tools, we have apps. I mean, here in Belgium, there are very nice examples of those individual building renovation roadmaps. It can also align the different jobs of the different people that are going to intervene in the building, and that's very important. And also, I would conclude with that, it can help also orientate subsidies to what needs to be done in buildings over the next 5 to 10 years, including reduction of energy demand. And I'll jump on that in the next question. That energy needs is very important as well, and articulating that with decarbonized heat solution. Thanks.
Thank you very much, and thank you for shifting to this question of the existing building stock, because it's clearly we have to focus on that. So with that, I hand over to Christiane to have your take also in the context of the discussion so far and today.
Yes, I have the inconvenient part maybe, because I'm standing here for the domestic hot water. I explain it exactly what I mean. Domestic hot water is not so easy as a part of the energy saving we discussed today. So, you know, in a new energy standard, heating to domestic hot water is 50-50 or more. In existing buildings, we have 60% of domestic hot water. But if you look on the efficiency of heat pumps, you look on the temperature of 60-55 to domestic hot water, and that's not very useful for the efficiency and not very useful for the energy efficiency of the building. Today, somebody uses electric boilers or residential thermal stations with temperature down to 40 degrees in the maximum of Legionella growth. Maybe it can be a solution, but not a solution for the health protection. Then we have a gap and a limit between energy saving and the hygiene. You also look on the hygiene on the HVAC system for ventilation, air conditioning, because of the indoor quality. But you also have to look on the we have to look on the hygiene of the drinking water. Little topic about Legionella is that the incidence of Legionella is very high. You don't know, maybe. We have Legionnaire's disease with a high incidence and also a high incidence of Pontiac fever. So you have to look on these kind of bacteria. In Germany, we have a study about 5% of the people have antibodies against Legionella. That means more than 4 million people. So you have contact with that. 50% of this contact is by drinking water, 50% by cooling towers, maybe, you know. To achieve the goal, in Germany, we try to have a recharge program to go down with the temperature from 60-55 to 47-45 with hydraulic balance system, and also with a new technology to solve this problem and make heat pumps efficient. And the research program ends up in 2023 to have good experience with this. We have also a pilot project in the field. Many of them, they works well with different companies in this research project. It goes about ultrafiltration in the circulation system. So this works very well, and now it seems that's possible to go down 13 Kelvin hygienic stability. Also the hygienic stability is the same at 55 and is the same as 13 Kelvin down. Yeah. And for the simulation of an energy efficiency, if you look on a building with 50-50 heating to hot water, you have energy saving of 25 up to 25% for this building, for existing buildings.
Thank you very much. So now I turn to the two members of the panelists. So what you, Philip, what you heard from now, how can the Commission, you are not in an easy position, I understand, but you were left here by the colleague. How can this coordination between eventual overlapping or contradicting policies happen, and how do you see the perspective of these? Of course, with focus on the eco-design upcoming developments.
Yes, thank you. So on the building, I'm not very well positioned to talk about that, but on the products, I would say that we have to value the internal market. Our impression is that nowadays, for heat pumps and boilers, for the heating markets, are really fragmented and more national markets than a European market. And if in fact we need these new heating solutions to become more affordable so that they can diffuse, and this requires a fully functional internal market where you have real competition that helps to push the cost, the prices down, and this is, in my opinion, a very important point. And when I say that we are at the moment testing if we can implement what is in REHVA EU for boiler, it also means that we have to check that it becomes affordable and it's also cost efficient, because these are conditions for the regulation to work. So at some point in time, it has to become. So it also means that probably there needs to be economies of scale in this sector. And anyway, if this is not what our manufacturers do, probably the economy of scale will come from outside Europe. So it needs to be done. And if we want to embrace fully this transformation, and also that our economy grows, as was said before in the day, we need this internal market to work. That's what we're trying to do with the eco-design, and also discussing with our colleagues in the EPBD to make sure that there are not contradicting objectives or means that are put in the decarbonization, in the way.
Thank you very much. And finally, Tomasz, from the perspective we heard about, the limits to engineering capacity, actually. So how do you see, coming back again to the renovation wave? So how can professionals prepare for that scale of increase and hopefully high quality energy, deep energy renovation projects?
So in my opinion, we should really have more action regarding education of the stakeholders which will take part in the future in this process of increasing the energy efficiency and increasing and to move to carbon neutral buildings. because we should provide them guidelines how to do it. So guidelines for designers, for installators, for building manager, for services company, because when we will proceed with this too fast, so generally we should change the heat sources, yes, especially for a building. But when we do it not properly, we can have problems. So such a project will be not realized in all buildings in the neighborhoods. So when you have in one buildings very bad issue with such a installation, another buildings will not follow up probably. So and we will have problems. So especially that heat pumps are not so easy solution to apply in existing buildings, because in my opinion also we should save existing heating and hot water installations, because when we would like to exchange everything, it will be very hard to proceed in a practice.
Thank you very much. And now I'm looking at the time, so we are a bit over the time, but we started a little bit later. So I would like to ask the panelists, but now this time really a short statement as a closing statement. So what did you learn and how to achieve this objective of again, the as fast as possible phase out or phase down of fossil fuels in our heating system? What is the most important to do for your companies or your professions? Starting from Hilary.
If I knew what the most important thing to do was, I think I would be working for the Commission. No, seriously speaking, there's so many important things that I'm not going to pinpoint one. We need to move on all fronts. We need to move on technology development. Hank's point about the route to market is a fundamentally important one. We can impose whatever regulations we want. If we don't have the delivery capacity, we will always fail. And that brings me to the engineering and installation topic. I think in practice, one of the biggest bottlenecks we have is the installer capacity. The education of younger generation installers in sufficient numbers to deliver on the change in practice. I'm not too worried about engineering capacity, I have to say, because engineers are being trained, in my view, not sufficiently, but to high numbers anyway. Installers are not. And we already have a shortage of competent plumbers coming.
Thank you.
No, that's correct. I fully agree to that. Although I think also engineering capacity is still a question mark. If I look at what's happening now, also if I look at our own investment program, starting up a new R&D center in Belgium, we have 400 then high qualified engineers have to be employed. New factory in Poland. How many workers have to be there? So in the coming year, already 4,000 more people we will need within the company, also to gear up towards the requirement for the European market. So these are massive investments that we are doing, but also realizing that in fact we need a lot of support, also from especially the countries themselves, and that we should get rid of the fight between the member states and Brussels. Can we agree or not? Because of all kinds of political reasons, but really try to focus on, okay, how are we going to achieve this REPower EU campaign? How can we, in a proper way, valorize the effectiveness of heat pumps in these buildings, and not have, again, 27 different calculation routes with all kinds of local escapes and roadblocks. I think for us, it is very important that we really start to act as a united Europe. And this is for us a very important step. We are taking our responsibility. We hope everybody will do. Yes.
Yes, maybe one final big word is to go back to the principles. We mentioned energy efficiency first. And I said it's still not fully understood. And I think the climate agenda is quite high on our radar, at least this community. energy efficiency has so much to deliver on energy security and energy cost. And I think we need to have that big picture in mind. We're talking about, drivers to accelerate the deployment on certain technologies, installer and training. I mean, that needs to be much bigger in the next years and in the future Commission agenda for this sector. But also we're talking about affordability of solutions, then affordability of solutions to acquire them, but also in a building, it needs to be affordable to run. And I think that we need to avoid new big elephants in the room that would come from lack of considerations of interactions between heating system and a building. It was mentioned, and thanks for mentioning the peak load. I think this is underrated in the current circumstances. It has a cost, and it has a cost not only for the people in the buildings, but basically for all the sectors, basically because it drives the price of energy up, and that is becoming also harder to decarbonize than for industry. So the sort of systemic approach needs to be much higher on the agenda. And revisiting the very benefits of energy efficiency first in this particular geopolitical context would be very important.
For me, health protection is number one, and then energy saving. I think you understand what I mean.
Yes.
Domestic hot water, we have new technologies in the next years to go down with the temperatures, I think, easily and easy to implement, and also some measures to do this. And I think this will be one part of the solution, not all, to make the efficiency better from the heat pumps.
Thank you very much. Closing statement from Philip, from your side as well.
So I like very much the United Europe. So that's a good word to end up this discussion. I would say that we have a momentum nowadays. We have momentum and a lot of alignment of most member states, and we try to work with this to make the most of it and to decarbonize it.
Finally, Tomasz, what we need to do as HVAC engineers?
I think that we, as I said, should link more attention to education of people who will make this in practice, and we should not really be concentrated on specific solution regarding this heat sources like heat pumps, because all heat pumps, gas boilers, district heating, because also now I think that now where is the room for this? A lot of industries and a lot of research institutions work on new heat sources which will be available on the market to cover this. But we also, but we should link more attention how such sources will be implemented in existing buildings. Yes, what for we should take care in order to proceed. Yes, we only should make some really small adjustment of existing system, which if they are in good condition, in order to proceed very fast in existing buildings, because the people do not allow us to move for maybe 2 years to make a modernization.
Thank you very much. And with this, I would like to thank all our panelists. And we heard, I think, very resonating statements regarding being united, using a European united approach, system level approach, training and installers and engineers alike. So with this, I think we can all agree in this room, and I would like to thank, and I would like to ask you to thank our panelists for their contribution, and hand over back to Jarek for closing remarks.
Pleasure.
Okay. Maybe please just stay here, because audience did not have any chance for the questions. We still have about 15 minutes time left. If you want to ask any panelist, please use this opportunity. So Livio, you are overactive today. I need
as always.
Yes.
No, I just would ask to more or less everyone. The point of sometimes it seems to me that we are coming back to reinvent the wheel. What I mean is that holistic design, for instance, is another way to say integrated design. I'm an old teacher and I'm always teaching that we have to design in an integrated way. That means the engineers at least are coming out knowing that the envelope before we have to reduce the energy needs, and then we move to the energy use through efficiency of the systems. Okay, and then we know that the balance is, at least at the engineering science, between increase of efficiency and cost increase. If the marginal cost is too high, forget to increase 0.001 the efficiency. Does make sense. This is the core of engineering. The main point seems to be to me that first of all, we have to clarify what we're talking about sometime, because for instance, heat pump, there is a lot of different heat pump systems. There are heat pump systems which doesn't need electricity. We have thermal driven heat pump, can be intermediate solution using the gas pipeline we already have. There are, say, boiler firm working with small heat pump, just replacement of wall-mounted boilers for the intermediate period, for instance. And this can be then a transient, to get the final solution. Of course, we have to invest on the infrastructure. But in my country, I saw to grow up the gas infrastructure in 5 years. Then it's matter just to decide, politically decide to invest to increase, for instance, the electricity networks and to push for more renewable power station. Then there is behind our technical solution, which are on the field, because our data, when we are talking about thermal driven pump, we are talking about technology developed 40 years ago. I mean, solar driven heat pump. You can drive with 60 degrees C if you use absorption heat pump and so on. That's the point. Then from one side, we need to, this is right, the point, to increase the knowledge of installers, because what I see the problem is in the lower level, because our experience with heat pump, for instance, that they think to use the heat pump as a boiler without taking care of the temperature level, and the control system is a failure, the control system, and that the system doesn't work correctly. Then teaching to the installer how to use the current technology. This is the first point. And the question is how you can think to try to solve this, because you cannot solve with labeling. You solve with some accreditation, for instance, at the European level. Have you working with this? This is a very important topic. And the other one is try to force EU country to invest on infrastructure, as was done, for instance, in Italy for the gas pipeline. Then you have greater freedom to try to fulfill our requirement for the future. It's, I think, impossible question, but.
Yeah, thanks. This was very complicated, but you want to say a word, please?
Yes, for the certification of heat pumps, it's already required in the Renewable Energy Directive. And so it's already developing, I would say, for a few years. This was my main point. For the electricity, it's, it depends on each nation, and depending on their plans to decarbonize, they will invest or not. The solution they have chosen. I can't say about that.
Yes. Very good, thanks. Any other questions, comments, or remarks by the audience? Yes, there is one.
Thanks. One point that is about energy efficiency is also the oversizing of the heat pumps, and this is something we didn't discuss also today, but what I see in France is that now we are not insulating the buildings, but we are moving, shifting to heat pumps, and I think that's mainly the same in all over Europe. So this is a problem of production, because we need to produce bigger heat pumps. So this is a problem of carbon because of the fluid, because of quantity of materials, and I'm not sure this is a real shift for carbon neutral, and this is a problem. and also about the working of the heat pumps when they are oversized for middle season. So I think this is something we could maybe discuss. I think the work of the task force is really interesting. It sounds good, and it's in line with my personal work about energy auditing. Today, the market is directed. The payback, the short payback, is the major things to make energy decrease. And maybe one thing is to say, okay, today short payback is good, and in 5 years the regulation will lead to insulate. So we discussed just before the problem of the short payback is when everything afterwards is expensive and more long payback. But here maybe it's the role of the regulation to say, today we need short payback because we need to make a real decrease. And we always speak about 10% of decrease of energy for this winter by saying we should hit 19 degrees. But if you look about intermittency, I don't know in English, just to say we stop to eat during the night, to stop to eat during the weekend, maybe it's 20, 30, 40% of eating gains that we can do already now. And I think this is the work of the task force also to explain that, and this is really interesting. I think one step further would be maybe this subject of oversizing to the shift. I don't know if we have something from somebody, sorry, from Daikin today. I don't know if you have a real position on this, because this impacts the market and this impacts the energy peak demand and consumption also.
Sure, yeah. I think I'm glad to give an answer on that, because we fully agree. And we see that most of the heat pumps in the market are oversized. And it's not because we like to earn more money and to sell a bigger heat pump. That is not a reason. The reason is that, in fact, from the calculations, points and the safeties included, sizes are specified, which are in fact generating an overcapacity, which is very negative again for the electricity consumption, the energy consumption. Because in fact, although most of the heat pumps today are inverter driven, but at a certain point of time, they go into an on-off cycling. And this is also eating unnecessary electricity. So proper sizing is very important. But therefore also the standards that have been developed for EPBD are very important, that this is well absorbed in each of the member states, that people are prepared to do their calculations in a different way than they used to do. And of course, the background is clear. If you had a gas condensing boiler or a gas boiler in the past, it always had overcapacity. Yeah. So in that sense, it was not a point of concern. But today, it is absolutely a point of concern. And it can save money. If you do a proper sizing, you probably can use a smaller heat pump, and that is saving money. But so therefore, we fully support this remark. Yes.
Fully agree with all of that. There's two sides to the oversizing problem. One is this, that we have design and dimensioning protocols that automatically lead to oversizing and specification of too large equipment. And then there's what you mentioned, that we are fundamentally omitting the energy efficiency first principle. And this is one of the big concerns I have with the one-eyed idea of solving problems by banning a certain type of heating equipment. If you ban a technology, the easiest way for the consumer to comply with the ban is to do exactly that. Just exchange that piece of technology to something, but not improve the performance of the underlying building at all.
Yeah, so please go on, Sally.
Yes, just to say that I completely agree. For me, that's the elephant in the room of this conversation, this interaction between the buildings and that system. I just know that this has also surfaced in some of the discussions next to the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive negotiations, talking about heat pump ready buildings. So maybe that's something for a next round of discussions, and I'm not heat pump expert here. Just to say that this is very important in our view. And this links back with the energy system and the peak load and what's then available in the energy system to meet that peak load. It's not necessarily decarbonized supply. So, I mean, just we need to square the circle, and for that have this whole building approach and energy system approach. And just to conclude that, I'm sure that in other ways, because we're working on our work plan for next year, this interaction between the systems, renewables, and the energy efficiency of the building and the building envelope will also be quite high on our agenda. So happy to prolong the conversation.
Yeah. Yes, you are making already very good closing remarks, but maybe Thomas can also say a word before I will give to Henk. And yes, there was actually two questions I see targeted to Thomas. So first was with payback time by way up, and when the oversizing of the heat pumps. And I really think that all existing business concepts in the market today so that they just will go and replace the gas boiler with a heat pump, and demand will not be reduced. So it means that this heat pump is large, operates at high temperature. So this can be technically done, but when we will phase out the electricity capacity and all these issues, and this is really a challenge how to do this in very large scale in the future, when we want to take this next step from the condensing gas boilers. So maybe Thomas, you can also comment this aspect, how this has been taken in the guidance what is under the preparation.
Okay, thank you, Jarek. Regarding this first report, which we are working on, so we have a draft. So we now reach the consensus between these 14 experts, which in terms of this report are really active. So it is not easy to reach consensus regarding Nordic country and South country. So, but we will try to manage. And we also have specific issue regarding oversizing of heat pumps. So we will also address this aspect, but in a general view, yeah, because we will not be specific on a specific solutions ready on which are available on the market, but which will be valid also for a future, yeah. But also regarding this, that somebody moved from a gas boiler in not insulated building when it is available and it is in line with law, which is valid in a specific country, the people act as according to the law. So if they are not educated and would not know that it is better to first make increase energy efficiency, make insulation, it should come from the law. In other way, they will act as they want, especially that the energy poverty now is quite very important issue, yeah. And when they would not have money to pay for a bills, how to make renovations without subsidies.
In fact, it's just also to come back on the previous remarks. And in fact, this is also a nice platform to challenge. And I think I would like to make two statements in order to challenge. It's on this, we discussed on the envelope, and that is bringing a certain need of that building. Also discussions with especially housing corporations, where they say, now let's create a box in the box. Why should we stick to the complete envelope of a building? And why don't we focus on the areas where people are really living? So we can have this box in box concept, make the investments far more affordable, have a proper sizing of the heat pump, and perhaps have, and that brings me to the second point, have a combination with another source of heat, and that could be the gas condensing boiler, then still used for hot domestic water, but could also be an air-to-air heat pump, just in the areas where by time to time, like in the sleeping room, where the son or the daughter is then studying for a couple of hours, you are heating up. But I think in most countries, this is not foreseen in the building legislation. No, you have to keep it strict to this envelope. So I think it's also, it should trigger us. How can we be more creative? I think it was with perhaps with the dinner with Livio, discussing, okay, in the student houses in the old days, you were sitting in front of a stove and heating up in front of you. Not that that is the comfort level and the health levels we are looking at, but it is a way of thinking, okay, why should we stick to this principle? And then also look into the hybrid solutions, and then not hybrid just as always water-based, because we used to have a gas boiler, so it must be a water-based distribution and emission system. No, that can be other systems as well, and also from the generator side. Therefore also mentioning the air-to-air heat pump. So you have more possibilities, and in that case also schedule the investments and make the affordability, bringing that closer. But that's more a remark to challenge you all. Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you. Now we are already very close to closing of the seminar, but maybe as one closing remark would be that we see how many technical possibilities there are available already today, where some of these are perhaps very new and innovative solutions. Some of them have been available for a long time, and there is no single solution how to make this improvement. So in that respect, I think what the work what has done with eco-design and to go on with one single energy label scale, what would be actually technology neutral, that's perhaps the best way how to go. And as a professionals, we really can support this type of technology neutral approach instead of banning something. But maybe one final question regarding this eco-design. Is there any plan still to have some biomass label factor to make a distinction between different type of boilers? If you have a gas boiler or if you have a pellet boiler, then if no biomass label factor would not be taken into account, then very likely this performance of a pellet boiler will not as good as even a condensing gas boiler. So Philip, maybe you can address also this question.
Yes, so the eco-design of solid fuel and boilers and stoves will start this year, the review study and the impact assessment. And indeed, they have, for the solid fuel boilers, they have a specific scale, which is, in fact, the same scale, but they have this biomass factor to be above fossil fuels. So this is clearly one point that will be discussed, and there are clearly two options. Or you have a separate scale and you keep it, or you put it together with the others. If you put it with the others, probably it means that you don't have the biomass factor. If you are alone, then you don't have the problem. But this is to be discussed. I cannot answer today. This will be the subject of the 2 years to come.
Yeah, and this brings me to, I would say, a final closing remark. So in the morning there was quite many presentations about the EPBD, and we noticed how complex document it is, and how much these let's say European ambition has been debated, and somebody say that it's over ambitious, and somebody say that it's too low ambition when going to this renovation, and let's say new ambition to go to a carbon neutral building stock in Europe by 2050. So this is very hard discussion, and we also recognize that it's not so easy to read this directive to end up with very basic principles like this energy efficiency first principle, that first you need to reduce the consumption, and then with this remaining consumption you need to cover as much as possible by the renewable energy. But in principle, yes, if very carefully followed the directive, this is possible to do. And we also noticed that in the directive there is a banning of fossil fuels on site, what is actually not technology neutral, because at the same time fossil fuels are still there in the district heating production. When we speak about peaks in the district heating, it's very likely with natural gas still for a long time, and also in the electricity production. So indeed, it's possible to say that in the building, you don't need to apply any more fossil fuels because there are so many other technologies present. But when we notice, for instance, with core generation appliances are still fossil fuel operated and could have quite a high efficiency in this single label scale. So these questions are not too straightforward, and we can expect that the discussion and handling EPBD in the parliament, perhaps some of these issues could be addressed, and then it would be easier to apply also in the member states, and perhaps could be a step towards a common market in Europe, when it is also more easy to deliver all these and to have a delivery capacity of all these technical solutions and installations needed in the future. But now I think it's time to close our seminar. I would like to thank our panelists for active discussion, and thanks for all of the audience for active attendance as well. So the seminar is closed. Thank you.
Thank you.